Chapter 43:05. Lisa saw that he finally couldn't resist his sleepiness and fell asleep, so she took a blanket from the side and gently covered him with it. At this moment, Alice happened to walk over. Seeing that Gong Fan had fallen asleep, she turned to look at Lisa and asked with concern, "Are you sleepy?" "I'm not sleepy." "You still say you're not sleepy." "I think you look a little sleepy." Lisa smiled. "No matter how sleepy I am, I'll guard him. Don't worry. I'm not worried about that. I'm afraid that you'll be too tired. But there's no other way. Because this is a special period, only you can control him." After a pause, Alice said with heartache, "It's been hard on you, Lisa." Lisa shook her head. "It's not hard at all. I'm the one who volunteered to stay by his side, take care of him, and protect him. Why would I feel that it's hard?" "All right," Alice said again. "How about I make you a cup of coffee?" Lisa nodded. After a while, Alice brought a cup of coffee over. Lisa took a sip. Even though she felt that it was bitter, she forced herself to drink it. At night, the lights in the cabin were switched off, leaving only a wall lamp lit in the living room. Gong Fan was lying on the sofa, sleeping soundly with the blanket wrapped around him. Lisa sat at the side. She just sat there, but she was bored to death. The 10-hour flight was very boring and long. But she had to be vigilant at all times and not be negligent. Gong Fan was a dangerous person. Without a doubt, Alice suspected that there was another dangerous personality residing in his body. She believed it. After all, she was unwilling to believe that the real Gong Fan and you would be so heartless as to kill Xianxia at all costs. As for what kind of physical condition it was, everything would have to wait until they returned to Hurricane before they could come to a conclusion. Alice felt that this matter was very tricky. It was because of Yu and Gong Fan that she braced herself and decided to study this field. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bothered to pay attention to the field of multiple personality disorder. The world of dual personality and multiple personality disorder was full of unimaginable fantasy. Even so, she didn't seem to be very interested. However, because it was Yu, be it for Xianxia or Gongjia, he had to be more careful. Alice went back to her room. She first contacted several colleagues in the psychiatry department of the medical center before going to sleep. At the same time, in the hospital, Xianxia woke up after the effects of the medicine wore off. As soon as she woke up, Xianxia, who had been guarding her, immediately stood up nervously. "Mommy, you're awake?" He walked up to her worriedly and carefully held her hand. He tried to sound as calm as possible. "How is it? Does the wound still hurt? Where's Yu?" Her first sentence was very difficult, but she still managed to squeeze out a few vague syllables. After the painkiller pump's effects wore off, the wound started to hurt faintly. However, she gritted her teeth and endured it. Xianxia's expression froze when he heard this. "Where's Gong Fan?" Xianxia looked troubled and uneasy as Xianxia looked uneasy. "Where is he?" As she said this, she tried to sit up on the bed. When she moved just now, her wound was affected and she grimaced in pain. Chapter 43:06. As he spoke, he glanced at the fruits by the bed and asked with a smile, "Do you want to eat something? Are you hungry?" "Where is Gong Fan?" Xianxia repeated stubbornly. Xianxia's expression finally froze. He held his forehead dejectedly. "Mommy, where is he?" Xianxia's tone finally became anxious when she couldn't see Gong Fan. "Answer me." "Mommy, calm down. You're injured now and your wound has just been stitched up. Don't get agitated. Lie down first." Xianxia's chest heaved slightly. She was a little anxious, but she was worried about Xianxia's emotions. She suppressed her agitation and kept asking, "Where is Gong Fan?" Why aren't you answering me? I just want to know where he is. Why are you here watching over me but not seeing him? Where did he go? Did something happen?" When Xianxia heard this, he felt very upset. He understood that in Xianxia's heart, perhaps because she had depended on Yu for such a long time, so her feelings for Yu were stronger than his. He knew that Xianxia favored Yu, but he also understood. After all, humans were not saints. A bowl of water would never be filled. He understood Xianxia's preference for Yu, but sometimes he also felt a little disappointed and sad. Xianxia said desolately, "Isn't it good for me to watch over you?" I watched over you for an entire night. When you woke up, you didn't even see who I was, but the first names you called were Gongfan and Yu. Do you not want me to watch over you? His tone was desolate and lonely. Xianxia was secretly shocked. At the same time, she realized that her tone and expression had made Xianxia feel a little lonely. I'm sorry, Xianxia. Xianxia grabbed his hand sadly. I'm sorry. I was just too worried. After all, you know Yu's condition. I'm too worried about him. Sometimes, I really wish I was Yu. Even though I'm not in good health at least. I can get more of your attention. Xianxia couldn't help but give up on himself. Xianxia immediately scoffed. Don't spout nonsense. You're in such good health. Yu is so envious of you. You're not allowed to say such things in the future. Because I'm jealous. Little Chen suddenly blurted this out. He looked up at Xianxia and took a deep breath. I envy him. No matter what, you always prioritize his feelings and take care of him. Although I don't covet such a privilege, I don't envy it. Moo, it's not real. He was envious, but because he was the older brother, he tolerated it. He yearned for it, but because Yu was the younger brother, he gave in. Xianxia liked him. She liked how sensible he was. Hence, he wanted to be more sensible. He worked hard. But, in the end, he still couldn't compare to Yu. He didn't say that he wanted to compete with Yu. Instead, he hoped. If he could get more attention, even if it was just a little bit, he wouldn't be greedy. Xianxia looked at Xianxia's desolate expression, and felt as though a knife was being twisted in her heart. I'm sorry. I know it's unfair to you. She didn't think that this would hurt Xianxia's feelings. This wasn't what she wanted. Chapter 4307. When Wuxia heard from the nurse that Xianxia had woken up, he hurried over. However, when he reached the door of the ward, he sensed that the atmosphere in the room was extremely tense. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. Xianxia was lying on the bed with reddened eyes. Xianxia was sitting quietly beside her. He did not leave her side, but he clearly looked a little lonely. What's wrong? Little Chen, on the other hand, buried his head even lower. He lowered his head on purpose. His fringe covered his slightly reddened eyes so that Wuxia would not see it. However, even though he did not want Wuxia to see it, Wuxia could imagine the expression on his son's face. Even though he did not know what had happened, this was the first time he had seen Xianxia look so lonely. Wuxia walked slowly to his son's side and gently patted him on the shoulder. The communication between father and son was often this simple. There was no need for words. He was silent, but it gave him a lot of strength. Xianxia forced his tears back and looked up to meet his father's eyes. Daddy. You must be tired. Wuxia looked at his son's tired face and said, You stayed by mommy's side all night. It must have been hard on you. No, it wasn't hard. Mommy is awake now. I'm here. You should go back and rest. But don't tire yourself out. You're still growing. Don't stay up for too long. When Xianxia heard this, he stood up. However, his body was swaying, and he looked a little dazed. When Xianxia saw this, she was annoyed and heartbroken. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she did not say anything. Xianxia left the ward, gently closed the door behind him, and left without a sound. Wuxia sat down on his seat and gently held her hand. His tone was gentle as he asked, You're awake. Xianxia lowered her head in vexation, looking like a child who had made a mistake. Wuxia pursed his lips and roughly guessed what had happened just now. This man was so shrewd. Just by looking at the silent expression between the two people, he could figure out their psychological state. Instead of going straight to the point, he changed the topic. I remember when we went to the pet shop, you saw a room with a closed door. You were curious and asked why the door wasn't open. What did the owner say? Do you still remember? Xianxia was a little stunned. She didn't know why Wuxia said that, but seeing his serious expression, she didn't question him. She thought for a while and said, I remember that the shop owner said that a bitch gave birth to a puppy, so it's inconvenient for her to see strangers. Then, do you know why it's inconvenient for a female dog to see a puppy after giving birth to one? Xianxia was at a loss and shook her head. That's because once a female dog comes into contact with a living person's aura, it will be frightened. When it's frightened, it will eat the puppy. Hiss! She sucked in a breath of cold air. How could they be so cruel? Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile as he slowly explained. That's because a female dog will be very weak after giving birth. In addition, the female dogs in pet shops are all locked in cages. Once they come into contact with something they perceive as dangerous, they will realize that they and the puppy have nowhere to run. Hence, out of maternal instinct and protective instinct, they will eat the puppy. How is that possible? Don't you think that's too far-fetched? Even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. Chapter 4308. Mu Yaja looked at her deeply. There were too many complicated emotions in his gaze. Because, as the saying goes, caring makes one confused. Motherhood is great, but sometimes it is also blind. When Xianxia heard this, she was stunned. She finally understood the meaning behind Mu Yaja's words. The reason why he said this to her was probably because he also noticed that she was too concerned about Yu, so much so that she had become blind. She had even neglected Xianxia for a while. It might be difficult to achieve an absolute balance between the relationship between mother and son. However, she also realized that she seemed to be too biased. Xianxia sighed and said sadly, I understand what you're trying to say. Actually, the female dog cares about the puppy and protects the puppy. However, because she thinks that she is protecting the puppy, she eats the puppy. As a result, the puppy doesn't even have the chance to open his eyes and see the world clearly. Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows but did not say anything. Xianxia said helplessly, Yu has been in poor health since he was young. I always felt that this was my fault. I always regretted it. Mu Yaja was puzzled. What are you regretting? I always regret that if I didn't keep him by my side out of selfishness, perhaps his health wouldn't be so poor. So, you want to make up for what you think is your fault? Xianxia nodded guiltily. Then, aren't you also wrong for treating Xianxia? Xianxia was speechless for a moment. Look, Xianxia stayed by your side the whole night. When you woke up, you were in a hurry to find Yu and ignored his concern. Xianxia was shocked. You saw it just now? No. Then why did you? I judged it from his expression and yours. Xianxia was shocked. She did not expect this man to be so observant and sensitive. She became more and more annoyed. Did Xianxia really watch over me all night? Yes. More than one night, right? I also asked him to rest, but he wasn't willing. He said that he had to guard you. When Xianxia heard this, her heart ached even more. She felt suffocated when she imagined Xianxia's desolate gaze. Actually, regardless of what happened, even if you did not keep Yu by your side and even if I brought Yu back to the Mu family, even if he received the best treatment in the world, he may not have received so much love. If he wasn't there to tie us down, we might not have been able to meet again. Since it had already happened, going back to the past, even if there was a single mistake, the trajectory of life would fall like dominoes. I think that no matter who it is, no one is willing to go back and start over. When Xianxia heard this, she did not say anything. Mu Yaja knew that she must be feeling sad. She also realized that she was too harsh on Xianxia in this aspect. Hence, she looked like she was about to break down. Mu Yaja did not mention Xianxia. Instead, he asked indirectly, Do you remember what happened before? Xianxia was obviously stunned. She looked up and stared blankly at Mu Yaja. Her lips were obviously trembling. Do you still remember? Ha! Chapter 4309. I don't remember. Do you really not remember or are you faking it? Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows and said, I'm your husband. What else do you have to hide from me? I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? Mu Yaja didn't think much of it. I'm here. What are you afraid of? Could it be that Xianxia was worried that he would find out the truth and hate Yu and Gong Fan? Xianxia lowered her head and sighed helplessly. I'm afraid that it's real. I don't want to believe that it's real. I've been lying to myself. It's fake. It's my hallucination. Sure. Mu Yaja pulled her into his arms, his heart aching. Since it's already happened, what's the point of lying to yourself? Xianxia recalled the scene before she fainted and sucked in a deep breath of cold air. In the end, She could not stop her tears from rolling down her cheeks. They were connected by flesh and blood. She had been stabbed by her own child. Until now, Xianxia couldn't believe it when she recalled the hideous expression on that innocent and adorable face. She was in so much pain. That's not real. Xianxia choked and said, I don't believe it. That's Gong Fan. That's Yu. That's not real. Yes, that's not real. Something must have gone wrong. Wuxia stroked her hair gently and comforted her. Don't worry too much, okay? Everything will be fine. That's definitely not Gong Fan. He wouldn't do that. Yu wouldn't do that either. Okay, I believe you. When Xianxia heard his words, she finally heaved a sigh of relief. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. Then, can you tell me now what exactly happened? Xianxia calmed down a little as she slowly explained the situation. At that time, she only remembered that she was sitting by the bed and cutting an apple for Gong Fan. At that time, Gong Fan was still in a semi-conscious state. The nurse said that Gong Fan would wake up soon. She thought that when he woke up, the apple would be cut. After she finished peeling the apple, Gong Fan woke up. She was ecstatic because the doctor had told her that if Gong Fan woke up, it meant that he was fine. However, her joy did not last long. Because she felt that Gong Fan's expression was obviously a little unusual. Usually, even though Gong Fan was very cold to others, no matter when he faced her, his gaze was always extremely gentle. However, things were different now. Cold, indifferent, and expressionless. His eyes even had a hint of icy cold sharpness. Xianxia then asked him if he wanted to eat some fruit. Gong Fan followed the direction of her hand, and his gaze landed on the fruit knife beside the fruit plate. A layer of scarlet gradually surfaced in his eyes. He suddenly reached out and held the fruit knife tightly. Xianxia was shocked. She didn't know what his motive was or why he was holding the knife. However, when she saw him holding the knife so tightly, she didn't know why, but at that time, she faintly felt that there was something wrong with the person in front of her. She started to retreat. Just as she stood up and took half a step back, Gong Fan held the knife and stabbed at her fiercely. Chapter 43:10. Immediately after, the knife was forcefully pulled out. Xianxia clutched her abdomen and fell to the ground in despair. At that time, my entire mind went blank. I couldn't believe that Gong Fan would stab me with his own hands. At that time, the fruit knife that Xianxia used was brought from home and was meticulously made. Otherwise, if Gong Fan had pulled it out like that, the handle and the blade would have broken into two due to the strong suction force from the flesh. At that time, there were two fortunate things. One was that Xianxia rushed over in time. When Gong Fan waved the fruit knife and was about to stab her again, Xianxia stopped him in time. Another fortunate thing was that, although the knife had been pulled out of his body, causing him to bleed profusely, Xianxia was still in the hospital. If this had happened at home or somewhere more than a 30-minute drive away from the hospital, she would definitely have been in a life-threatening situation due to excessive blood loss. Xianxia stopped Gong Fan and hurriedly called for the nurse. Then, she fell into a daze due to the blood loss. Because of the intense pain in her abdomen, she didn't dare to move easily. From the beginning to the end, she only maintained one posture. She still remembered the piercing pain caused by the muscles all over her body when she was carried onto the operating table. It was still unforgettable. What happened after that had nothing to do with her. She only remembered waking up once after the operation. However, because the effects of the medicine had just worn off, when she woke up, the nurse happened to be changing her dressing. She only felt that there was a terrifying wound on her abdomen. It had already been stitched up, but the wound was extremely hideous. The stitched area was red and swollen, and there was yellow medicine applied on it. It was a stark contrast to the rest of her fair skin. She called out Yu, but her lips and teeth were blurry. The nurse thought that she was crying out in pain and gave her an analgesic pump. Then, she fell asleep again in a daze. Where's Gong Fan? Xianxia looked at Wuxia worriedly. Where is he now? Wuxia didn't say anything for a moment. When Xianxia saw this, she couldn't help but tremble in fear. You didn't lock him up, did you? In fact, if Wuxia really locked him up, Xianxia would not be surprised. After all, to everyone, Gong Fan was now a dangerous person. Wuxia said, I didn't lock him up. Then where is he? Wuxia said calmly, I've already asked Alice to take him back to Hurricane. Wow, what? Xianxia's heart jumped again. Mu Yaja knew that she was a little agitated when she heard this, so he held her shoulders and said seriously, "Now, you have to admit that Yu Yu is sick and Gong Fan's existence is Yu Yu's suffering. Didn't you say before that you were determined to give up Gong Fan for Yu Yu? Although this decision may be a little cruel, but do you really have the heart to destroy Yu Yu's life for your selfishness?" Xianxia couldn't help but widen her eyes. Do you really have the heart to do that? Mu Yaja's eyes were slightly red. It was obvious that he had used up all his willpower to make this decision. Chapter 43:11. Hell. Just hearing this word made Xianxia feel extremely depressed. She pursed her lips tightly and her whole body began to tremble. She didn't dare to blink, afraid that if she blinked, her tears would fall. However, no matter how wide her eyes were, tears continued to fall from her eyes and dripped onto the white blanket. "I'm sorry." Xianxia's voice was extremely hoarse. "All this time, I've been like a spoiled child. Whether it was you, Xiaojia, Huajin, Yu Yu, Xiaoyichen, Gong Fan. No matter who it was, they all doted on me like I was a princess. I've been spoiled, and I've become more and more willful. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been so selfish. For my own thoughts, I became Yu Yu's shackles. I'm sorry." She had apologized countless times, but when she said this, it really meant that she had no choice but to let go. No matter how unwilling she was, she had to let go. All this time, she had been doted on by everyone. She was deeply grateful that she had a husband named Mu Yaja, a pair of adorable twins named Xiaoyichen and Yu Yu, a cute daughter named Yueyao, and two younger brothers named Gongjia and Huajin. Everyone doted on her at all costs. She had been too arrogant because she had been pampered too much. She had wanted too much. She had asked for too much. However, what she wanted did not belong to her at all. She couldn't bear such a price. It was all Yu Yu's fault. When she thought of Yu Yu, her heart ached fiercely again. "I'm sorry." Xianxia was so upset that she cried loudly. Mu Yaja hugged her, his heart aching. "Don't cry. This isn't your fault." Xianxia couldn't stop crying. Even now, the wound had not been completely stitched up. Every time she cried, it would affect the wound, but she could not control it at all. Mu Yaja's heart ached, but there was nothing he could do for her. He could only kiss her silently and hug her. Unknowingly, his eyes were also wet. Outside the ward, Xiaoyichen leaned against the door and covered his mouth. His eyes were unbelievably red. "Mommy!" In the cabin, amidst the incomparable silence, Gong Fan's body suddenly curled up. His hands grabbed his chest, and his entire body trembled from the pain. Even though his voice was very soft, Lisa, who was resting at the side, was immediately awakened. She turned her head and saw Gong Fan curled up into a ball on the sofa. She rushed over nervously. "What happened? Mommy?" Lisa was extremely worried. She gently patted his face, thinking that he was having a nightmare, and shook him. "Gong Fan, wake up. Are you dreaming? Gong Fan?" Gong Fan was finally awakened by her shaking. He lifted his heavy eyelids with difficulty and opened his eyes. His vision was blurry, but he saw Lisa's hazy face. Lisa sized him up nervously. "What's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?" Gong Fan sat up from the sofa with his hand on his chest. He still had lingering fears. My chest hurts." "Hurts? Why would it hurt?" As soon as he finished speaking, Lisa saw Gong Fan's breathing suddenly quicken. Respiratory syndrome. Chapter 43:12. Now that he had suddenly relapsed, Lisa was at a loss. How did this happen? Gong Fan leaned against the sofa and curled up. His breathing became more rapid and his shoulders trembled violently. Lisa's heart ached, but she didn't know what to do. "What should we do?" Lisa immediately rummaged through the cabinets and started looking for the paper bag. Gong Fan had used up all his energy just to maintain the balance of his breathing. Lisa couldn't find the paper bag no matter how hard she searched. However, she was still calm. She rushed to Alice's room and knocked hard on the door. "Alice, Gong Fan is having a relapse. Wake up." Alice wasn't in a deep sleep. She was woken up and rushed out of the room. Just as she reached the door, she heard rapid breathing coming from the sofa. She immediately realized that something was wrong. She turned around and returned to the room. She immediately took out the paper bag from her bag. Because of Gong Fan's health, the paper bag was always prepared. Although Yu Yu's health was already very stable, Alice still prepared these necessities just in case. She took the paper bag and walked to Gong Fan's side. She stuffed the paper bag into his hand. Grab him. Do you know the method I taught you? Gong Fan trembled as he grabbed the paper bag and aimed the mouth of the bag at his nose. I've had respiratory syndrome. The patient would breathe faster and shallower due to excessive anxiety, pain, fever, crying, and other situations, causing respiratory alkalosis, which was hypocapnia caused by excessive carbon dioxide excretion. It could be shown as dizziness, numbness in the hands and feet, and around the mouth. By using the paper bag, it formed a dead space for the respiratory tract, which helped to restore the concentration of carbon dioxide. This was a simple and effective method. With Alice's help, Gong Fan used the paper bag and tried his best to adjust his breathing. Take a deep breath. Gong Fan took a deep breath. The paper bag shrank rapidly as the air flowed out. Breathe, exhale. Gong Fan slowly exhaled the turbid air from his mouth and nose. His rapid breathing gradually cooled down. Gong Fan tightened his mouth and his breathing became slower and slower. Alice heaved a sigh of relief. Lisa asked with a strange expression, "Why did he suddenly fall ill again? I thought that he had completely recovered from his respiratory syndrome." This kind of illness is mostly caused by mental and psychological problems. In addition, his lungs and heart aren't as healthy as ordinary people, so it's easy for him to relapse. It can be triggered by any reason, and there is no such thing as complete recovery. Lisa nodded as if she understood. Then, you must be more careful in the future. It's better to have these things ready at all times. Yes. What would happen if there was no paper bag? Alice raised her eyebrows and replied, "Didn't I say before that if it's serious it might cause shock?" Lisa shuddered. It was no wonder that Xianxia would always carry a few paper bags with her at all times, even if she didn't carry any cosmetics or makeup powder in her bag. So this was the reason. She even felt that Xianxia was too cautious. Little did she know that Xianxia's concern for Gong Fan was meticulous and meticulous. Chapter 43:13. Gong Fan, how do you feel? Are you feeling better? Gong Fan nodded and pursed his lips. I'm fine. Alice held his wrist and turned it up to check his pulse. His heart rate was still at a relatively fast level. What's going on? Alice also felt that it was a little strange. Although it could be triggered by anything, this relapse was too sudden. Even he was a little caught off guard. Gong Fan calmed down and shook his head. I don't know why either. It's just that I feel my heart palpitate for no reason. While I'm half awake, subconsciously, my breathing suddenly quickened. Did you have a nightmare? Gong Fan was startled and was a little suspicious. How did you know? Why would I feel my heart palpitate for no reason? Gong Fan lowered his eyes in desolation. He leaned against the sofa dejectedly and said sadly, Am I a burden to you? Alice was stunned. Humans were all afraid of death. No matter who it was, they would always be filled with fear at the moment before death. Even someone as strong as Gong Fan would fear death one day. To the alternate personality, the day it was exiled was the day it completely disappeared. Alice took a deep breath. I will protect you. Why? Why do I exist as such a life form? Gong Fan sighed in his heart. Humans were really a mysterious and complicated existence. When Lisa heard this, she couldn't take it anymore. She said nervously, Is there really no other way? There are two personalities. Do we have to get rid of one? Yu. Isn't Yu also willing to accept Gong Fan? Why are the two personalities conflicting with each other? Alice frowned and was a little hesitant. Lisa continued, Now, Yu and Gong Fan's personalities are clearly getting along harmoniously. They can get along harmoniously. They have the habit of keeping diaries. No matter what happens today, they will record it in their diaries. No matter who woke up that day, they would be able to understand what had happened that day through the diary. Wasn't that a good thing? Why must you make such a cruel decision? Alice sighed. There's one thing I might have forgotten to mention. What? Dual personality disorder and multiple personality disorder don't actually have much of a boundary. Let me give you an example. In Yu's world, there are two palaces. Only the main personality lives in one palace, And no one knows how many personalities live in the other palace. Do you understand? Lisa didn't quite understand. She didn't say anything and continued to listen to her. Alice continued, now because of Gong Fan's existence, the door has been opened. Then, because of his existence, won't this open door never be closed? Since the door is open, other personalities will come out one after another. Sometimes, these personalities won't come out at all. Sometimes, these personalities will swarm out. When Lisa heard this, she could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Chapter 43:14. Lisa frowned and suggested an idea. If that's the case, what if you and Gong Fan work together to close this door? Then, Gong Fan and you could live in the same palace. Wouldn't that work? Alice pondered and said, I suspect that Gong Fan used to live in Yu's palace. Hence, the two personalities merged together and there was no obvious difference. This kind of illness was too complicated. A person's mental illness was far more difficult to control than a physical illness. A person's physical illness could be seen and could be cured through surgery. However, mental illness could not be cured. Hence, in the field of mental illness, hypnosis was definitely the best treatment method. Then the problem is how to close this door. Alice stood up and glanced at Gong Fan. She said hesitantly, Do you know what I suspect the most now? What? I suspect that Professor Romanka created Natalia's second personality through hypnosis. Then, he sent Natalia to Yu's side and the second Natalia, through hypnosis, created a third personality in Yu to complete the purpose of his experiment. Lisa was suspicious. Does Romanka know about Yu's illness? Yes. Alice said, I consulted him about Yu's illness before. He was very interested and suggested that he wanted to do the experiment on Yu. I did not agree. You mean? Lisa quickly understood what Alice was trying to say. Actually, Romanka deliberately sent Natalia to Yu's side so that it would be easier for him to carry out his plan? Rather than calling it a plan, it was better to call it a conspiracy. That's what I suspect. Gong Fan was silent. Just thinking about it in detail was enough to make one terrified. Indeed, after experiencing Natalia's hypnosis, his body had undergone earth-shaking changes. Then what should we do now? When we return to Hurricane, I will invite Romanka over. Lisa was surprised. Isn't that the same as letting a wolf into the house? How could that be? If a hurricane comes, then it's my territory. What kind of storm can he stir up? When Lisa heard this, she was still a little worried. Professor Romanka always gives me the feeling that he is a cunning old man. He was once an authority in psychology and a senior professor of multiple personality disorder. When I interacted with him before, I had to be careful when I spoke to him. Gong Jie passed through a grill and entered another part of the cabin. The entire private jet was divided into two cabins. The other cabin had the same structure as the main airport he was in. By then, Hua Jin had already put Natalia to sleep. Hua Jin, on the other hand, had drunk some coffee in the afternoon, so he wasn't sleepy and was drinking tea in the living room. When Gong Jie walked in just now, he caught a glimpse of Gong Jie from the corner of his eye and immediately felt nervous. Why are you here? Can't I be here? Gong Jie sat up on the sofa and crossed his legs elegantly. Hua Jin looked even more uneasy. He put down the teacup and looked at Meng Chao. It's so late. Aren't you sleeping? I can't sleep. Chapter 43:15. Hua Jin stood up, poured a cup of brewed tea, and handed it to him. Gong Fan took it and asked curiously, What tea is this? I don't know. I only saw this box on the wine cabinet. Da Hong Pao. Gong Jie only remembered that there were Da Hong Pao and Tai Ping Hokue on the plane. That was to be used when receiving VIPs. Da Hong Pao? When Hua Jin heard this, he was very curious. Is this real Da Hong Pao or fake Da Hong Pao? The reason why he asked this was not because he doubted Gong Jie, but because Da Hong Pao was really a noble tea. It was extremely rare. Da Hong Pao was produced in Fujian's Wui Mountain. It was an oolong tea of excellent quality. It was a special tea in China. There were very few Da Hong Pao in history, and the only Da Hong Pao that was recognized were the few on the walls of the Nine Dragons' Nest. Because the Da Hong Pao tea trees grew on cliffs where no one could climb, the monks of the temple would use fruits as bait to train monkeys to pick the tea leaves. Therefore, some people called it monkey-picking tea. It was also because of this that the production was very low. The Dahong Pao tea trees were 10 feet tall, and the leaves were as big as palms. They grew on cliffs, and when the wind blew, the leaves fell. The monks of the temple collected them to make tea, which could cure all kinds of diseases. At its best, the production of tea leaves was only a few hundred grams. A few hundred grams was less than a catty. Most of them were supplied internally by people in positions of power, and the Dahong Pao on the market was not considered pure Dahong Pao. No wonder he only saw a little of it. He thought that it was the residue of Gong Jie drinking it, so he soaked it all. No wonder the smell was so strong. When he thought of this, Hua Jin suddenly felt uneasy. Dahong Pao was so rare. God, it was Dahong Pao. If it was the real deal, then wouldn't he be wasting God's gift recklessly? Do you think I would drink fake tea leaves? No. No. Dozens of grams of tea leaves were all brewed by him. Rounding it up, he felt as if he had drunk 100 million yuan. It's too strong. Gong Jie muttered and asked casually, "Don't tell me you soaked all of it?" Hua Jin blushed with guilt. He replied awkwardly. "I thought it was just ordinary tea leaves." Gong Jie's face darkened. "You think my tea leaves are ordinary?" "No, that's not what I meant." Hua Jin lowered his head and said guiltily, "At most, I'll compensate you. I bought these tea leaves from an auction. 50 grams. 5 million. You'll pay for it?" Hua Jin's breath was stuck in his throat, making it even more difficult for him to breathe. However, he didn't want Gong Jie to look down on him. He braced himself and said, "I'll pay for it. It's not like I can't afford it." After being in the entertainment industry for so many years, it wouldn't be right to say that he didn't have any family background. Although 5 million wasn't a sky-high price, 5 million for just a few dozen grams of tea leaves really made his heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys ache. Hua Jin bargained. 5 million. I'll pay you 5 million. Why is it 5 million? Gong Jie didn't understand. Hua Jin pursed his lips and glanced at the teacup in Gong Jie's hand. "Didn't you drink it too? The drinker gets a share. Is that how you calculate it?" Gong Jie said unhappily, "You've soaked such good tea leaves in one go. The essence is gone, and you still have the nerve to say that the drinker gets a share?" Hua Jin felt even more guilty. He muttered to himself, but he couldn't hear what he was muttering. How painful. Chapter 43:16. When Gong Jie saw him sitting on pins and needles, he suddenly found it funny. The anger in his heart was also swept away. Hua Jin felt very uneasy. He actually drank such precious tea in one go. He suddenly felt a little guilty. When Gong Jie saw this, he snorted. "Forget it. I don't like Dahong Pao. I like to drink green tea." "Then, what's the tea beside Dahong Pao?" Hua Jin asked. "Taiping Hokue." "Hokue." Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and glanced at him meaningfully. "Why? Are you still coveting my Hokue?" No. How would he dare to? Just drinking a pot of Dahong Pao was enough to make him bankrupt. If he drank another pot of Hokue, wouldn't he be emptied of all his savings? Corrupt. It's really too corrupt. Hua Jin thought to himself. In this world, the gap between the rich and the poor was really too big. Some people were born with a silver spoon in their mouths. When they were born, they were destined to be the cream of the crop. Some people, on the other hand, had lived for most of their lives and did not understand even a little bit of what life was like. 5 million to Gong Jie might be a pot of tea, but to an ordinary family, it might be an income that they would not be able to earn in their lifetime. It's not fair. Hua Jin also felt a little unbalanced. Although his voice was very low, Gong Jie heard it clearly. "What's not fair?" Hua Jin said frankly. "Look, this pot of tea of yours is equivalent to an ordinary family's lifetime savings. In other words, an ordinary person who works hard for a lifetime may not even be able to afford this pot of tea of yours." When Gong Jie heard this, he smiled. "How is it not fair? I think it's very fair." "Why?" "That's because we were born different." Gong Jie's tone was not arrogant at all. It was a calm narration that could not be any calmer. When Hua Jin heard this, he did not dare to agree. "How is it fair? If you judge things according to your logic, then everyone's life is very unfair. Some people are born with broken limbs, while others are born healthy and intelligent. Can you say that those who are healthy and intelligent are at fault? Hua Jin was speechless and finally shook his head silently. In that case, why is it unfair for some people to be born rich while others are born poor and remain poor for their entire lives? Hua Jin was actually unable to come up with an answer to such a change in conditions. In other words, if a person who was born with a disability walks on the road, according to your thinking, you will definitely think that he is the person in the world who was treated the most unfairly by fate. Then, I still feel that fate is unfair to me. Why? Hua Jin was a little confused. What else do you think is unfair? You live in a big villa and have your own private jet. To you, money is just a string of numbers in your bank account. You are blessed with good looks and will never know the taste of poverty. You probably can't even understand that some people can't live a stable life, right? You are the elite standing at the top of the pyramid in this world. You will never know how the people at the bottom of the pyramid live. Chapter 43:17. Gong Jie's expression froze when he heard that. His gaze turned cold as it slowly landed on Hua Jin. He gently put down the teacup in his hand. Hua Jin also realized that his words were too extreme. He bit his lips, not knowing how to explain. Gong Jie placed the teacup on the table and smiled. You're wrong. Ha! On the contrary, I've seen more of such deviations than you. Gong Jie looked up and stared at him. In southern Fei, I've seen extravagant aristocrats who drove luxury cars worth millions and lived in mansions worth tens of millions. The slums that were separated from the wealthy district by a street never had a single light on at night. In Felvben, I've seen children who had just turned 6 years old follow their siblings and jump into dirty gutters. Even if they accidentally choked on a few mouthfuls of dirty water filled with hundreds of millions of bacteria, they would still try their best to scoop up a few plastic bottles to survive. To them, the most extravagant and luxurious meal was the leftovers of ordinary people that were on the verge of rotting. I've also seen refugees living in the flames of war, using their blood as the price to support a bunch of corrupt regimes. Yes, you're right. Fate is very unfair, but this is the true face of fate. It's very funny, but ordinary people don't dare to laugh at it. Hua Jin was stunned. Do you know what fate is? Gong Jie smiled. You can't get what you want, but you don't get what you want. Do you think those rich children are all enjoying life when they're born? Yes, they're enjoying life, but at the same time, they're also enduring it. Enjoying things that ordinary people couldn't even dream of, and enduring things that ordinary people didn't dare to endure. Gong Jie was destined to live an extraordinary life from the moment he was born. After returning to the Gong family, Gong Shaoying appreciated him and he began to stand out. His extraordinary talent gave him an irreplaceable place in the Gong family. However, with his talent, even if he did not return to the Gong family, he would not be buried. A strong and outstanding seed, if casually thrown into the dust, would quietly break through the soil and bloom into a beautiful flower. Just like Yu. His childhood environment was so ordinary that it could not be any more ordinary. However, Yu was destined to lead an extraordinary life. Yes, fate was such a funny thing. But ordinary people didn't dare to laugh at him. Since you've got it, cherish it. After Gong Jie finished speaking, Hua Jin was still stunned for a long time. He didn't expect Gong Jie to say something so philosophical. Thinking about it, one could understand the meaning behind it. I'm sorry, Hua Jin sighed. I was too extreme. It's not a matter of being extreme or not. The man chuckled. It's just that you can't blame yourself for what you've gotten. Who doesn't have shackles? If that's the case, it's better. Hua Jin could not help but laugh bitterly when he heard that. It's hard to imagine that you're the one who said these words. Gong Jie glanced at him with a hint of self-mockery in his handsome eyes. If possible, I hope that my life will be more ordinary. How ordinary do you want it to be? Gong Jie's life was destined to be extraordinary. Hua Jin held his chin in puzzlement. If a person is too ordinary, it'll be very tiring. How do you imagine an ordinary life to be? It's good to be like you. Chapter 43:18. When Hua Jin heard that, he suddenly laughed. For an ordinary person like me, my life is already very extraordinary. But for young Master Gong, well, I'm indeed very ordinary. I have a stable job, an average-sized house, a car, and an ordinary family. At the very least, I don't want to be too deeply exposed to the cruelty of this world. Gong Jie smiled arrogantly. Even if I'm not Gong Jie, I'm destined to be extraordinary. Perhaps I won't lose to Wuxia. That's not necessarily true. Everything you have now besides yourself, a part of it is given to you by the Gong family. That's true. Gong Jie sneered. For Wuxia, a part of what he has comes from the Mu family, right? Hua Jin felt awkward. That's true too. I won't lose to him. Gong Jie was obviously not convinced by his brother-in-law, Wuxia. Hua Jin scratched his cheek with his fingers and teased. Seems like there's a strong smell of gunpowder in the air. I saw that both of you were getting along so harmoniously that I thought both of you would be able to coexist peacefully. Coexist peacefully? Maybe in our next life. Gong Jie did not buy Wuxia's words at all. If it were not for Xianxia, the two of them might have been destined to be enemies for life. Why are we talking about this topic unknowingly? It was only then that Hua Jin came to his senses. It was too exaggerated. Because of a pot of Dahong Pao, they had actually talked for so long. So, Gong Jie cast a sidelong glance at him. When do you intend to give it to me? What? Hua Jin could not help but feel confused by the sudden question. Gong Jie leaned closer to him and said word by word, 5,010,000. Hua Jin put up a defensive posture. You really want me to give it to you? I'm serious. Hua Jin's eyes darted around as he pretended to touch his body. Then he feigned exasperation and said, look, I don't have much money left on me. Young Master Gong, how about I give myself to you? Pay with your body? You can understand it that way. Gong Jie could not help but laugh. Hua Jin saw him smile, so he held his face with both hands and deliberately raised a charming smile, smiling very sweetly. Anyway, I'm conservatively estimating that I'm worth at least 5 million yuan. How about I give myself to you? Deal. When Gong Jie said these two words, Hua Jin looked surprised. Young Master Gong, I couldn't tell that you like men? I'm not interested in men. After a pause, Gong Jie looked at him meaningfully. But I'm very interested in you. Hearing this, Hua Jin's mouth was half open. He could not react for a moment. He was just joking and wanted to fool him with this 5 million yuan. How did he fall into the ditch he had dug? He did not know how to continue this conversation. Why? Are you regretting it? Hua Jin was speechless for a moment. He stood up awkwardly. Just as he was about to say something, the plane suddenly shook violently. Hua Jin lost his balance and fell onto Gong Jie's body. The plane encountered turbulence, causing it to shake. Gong Jie supported him with one strong arm. Hua Jin grabbed the corner of Gong Jie's shirt tightly to stabilize his center of gravity. Chapter 43:19. After the turbulence passed, Hua Jin lowered his head and tried to stand up, but Gong Jie reached out and pulled him back into his embrace. Hua Jin's face was burning. At the same time, his heart beat even faster because of his sudden action. Gong Jie lowered his head to size him up before asking out of the blue, Are you throwing yourself at me? When did I do that? Hua Jin struggled to get up, but Gong Jie grabbed his arm again with a playful look in his eyes. Playing hard to get? What nonsense was this man talking about? Gong Jie pinched his cheek with one hand. If you make such a joke again in the future and I take it seriously, what should I do? His tone didn't sound like a question, but more like a question. Hua Jin's brain went blank. If I take it seriously, will you take responsibility? Hua Jin. He did not mean that at all. He just wanted to be tactful and did not mean anything else. Gong Jie could not bear to tease him anymore. He stood up and said, If you encounter turbulence, it's not the safest choice to hide in someone's arms. You should return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt. This is the most basic safety measure. With that, under Hua Jin's glare, Gong Jie turned around and left. As soon as Gong Jie left, Hua Jin slammed the table. This man, what kind of nonsense is he saying? Hua Jin took a deep breath and finally calmed down. The 10-hour flight was long and torturous. Hua Jin fell asleep on the sofa. He did not know how long he had slept, but in his daze, he could only hear the rumbling of the turbulence and the ringing in his ears getting worse. He was jolted awake. He got up and looked out of the window, only to see that the plane had already pierced through the clouds and was rapidly descending toward an island. He found it very novel. This island has a very large port. This port is even much larger than the port in Osaka, Japan. There are many cargo ships docked at the port. From his high angle, it seems that he can only see a black mass of ships. Immediately after, as the plane descended rapidly, he saw a magnificent castle on the island. Even from afar, he could see it clearly. That majestic castle was magnificent. Usually, he would only see such castles in Hollywood movies. It was said that this castle had been built for a long time. It had a history of more than a few hundred years. When Gong Xiaoying bought this island, he also bought the land where the castle was located and moved it over. What was that saying? Indeed, one could do whatever one wanted with money. Hua Jin was already in a daze just by looking at her. This was the first time he had set foot on the Gong family's island. However, seeing it with his own eyes was far from what he had imagined. In his imagination, a private island, Hurricane's base, a military base, gunpowder. Hurricane's private island must be heavily guarded and gave off a gloomy feeling. However, the reality was that it was sunny and sunny. The sea was blue. Under the clouds, the true appearance of the castle was gradually revealed. It stood on the top of the island, exuding an inviolable majesty. Hua Jin sighed and widened his eyes. He leaned against the window and stared curiously at the castle, unable to take his eyes off it. Outside the castle, there was heavy security. Chapter 43:20. Hurricane. This was a term that seemed to control the entire world. Now, little by little, it was gradually becoming complete in front of him. After the plane landed, it went through a series of inspections. In Hurricane, almost all private planes returning from overseas, no matter who they were, had to go through a series of sophisticated inspections after landing. Even Gong Jie was no exception. They were worried that someone had tampered with the plane. He still remembered one time when Gong Jie came back from South Africa. After an inspection, he was shocked to find that many high-tech trackers had been secretly planted in his private plane without him knowing. These trackers were the most advanced technology in the world today. Even the 5 government buildings in Country M might not be able to detect them. If it were not for the meticulous inspection, these trackers would not have been discovered at all. Later, the plane was almost forced to be scrapped because no one could be sure if these trackers were still in the body of the plane. No one knew when these trackers had been planted. Since then, the landing inspection became more and more stringent. This time, the landing inspection took more than half an hour. When Hua Jin got off the plane with Natalia in his arms, he was tossed and turned a few more times. The reason why Hua Jin described it as tossing and turning was because the security personnel wanted nothing more than to lay him flat on the ground, strip him naked, and inspect him from the inside out. Was the inspection so strict? Why did he have to go through such a stringent inspection when he landed on the island? It was as if he was an international fugitive. Hua Jin still had a lingering fear in his heart. Such a huge scene also frightened Natalia. If Gong Jie had not stopped her, she might have had to go through a retina and blood test. After the inspection, Hua Jin saw Gong Jie and asked in fear, "You're probably the first person I've seen who wants to go through a physical examination after returning home." Gong Jie, on the other hand, was already used to it. This series of inspections, no matter who it is, except for a few members of the Gong family, there are no exceptions. "Why?" Hua Jin asked suspiciously, "Why do we have to go through such a detailed inspection when we come to this island?" More than that, Gong Jie glanced at him. "While you're on the island, you'll be wearing a surveillance device. If you trespass into the restricted areas of Hurricane, you'll trigger the alarm of the entire island. Before you leave, all the restricted areas will be fingerprinted. If you go to a place you're not supposed to go, you won't be able to leave again." Hua Jin shuddered when he heard that. "It's just going home. Is there a need for so many complicated procedures? Don't you feel tired?" Gong Jie smiled coldly. "That's why I don't like to go home." Hua Jin was stunned. He didn't know why, but he felt his heart ache. At least, if he went home, he wouldn't have to go through such strict checks. This point, there was no human touch at all. For some reason, he felt like he was being tightly bound, and there was no warmth at all. Now, when Hua Jin turned back to look at the island shrouded in fog, he seemed to have another feeling. Suddenly, he felt that the magnificent castle was more like a prison than a home. Gong Jie gave Muyaja a call. To his surprise, it was Yun Sheshe who answered. Chapter 43:21. Shao Jie. Gong Jie was a little surprised. Sister, you're awake? He pursed his lips and suddenly felt a little uneasy. Perhaps it was because he had taken Gong Fan away while she was unconscious. He waited silently for Xianxia to flare up at him. However, the expected anger did not come. Xianxia's calmness surprised him. Have you arrived at Hurricane safely? Gong Jie was a little surprised that Xianxia did not scold him. Where's Gong Fan? He's beside me. After a pause he said, Sister, don't you blame me? On the other side, Xianxia sighed helplessly. Why should I blame you, Xianxia? Haven't you done enough for me? Gong Jie was speechless. He said self-deprecatingly, I'm sorry. I don't know what I can do for you, but I've done my best. Xianxia, when I recover, I'll go to Hurricane to look for you. During this period, as his uncle, you must take good care of your nephew, okay? Yes, I will. Okay. Xianxia did not say much, but he could hear the loneliness and exhaustion in her voice. It was as if she was holding something back, and her voice was a little hoarse. Perhaps it was because of their telepathy. Gong Jie felt that she seemed to have made a serious decision. Sister. Yes? What are you thinking about? Gong Jie walked to the side and said worriedly, I have a feeling that you have a lot on your mind. After a long silence, Xianxia finally spoke. If there's really no other way, I'm really willing to give up on Gong Fan. At this point, Xianxia could not continue. She wanted to laugh to hide her heartache, but she could not hide it. I'm sorry to have worried you. All along, you've been indulging me and spoiling me. So much so that I've always imposed my own wishes on others. I'm sorry, Xianxia. Don't apologize to me. Gong Jie said somewhat angrily. Big sister, how are you being willful? You've been the most sensible one since you were young. You'd rather be wronged than let others be wronged. I'm the one who's willful. You've always tolerated me since I was young. Now that I've matured, what's wrong with me spoiling you? He had an insufferably arrogant aura, as if no one in this world could stop him from treating her well. Xianxia was extremely touched. What had she done to deserve a husband like Mu Yaja, a younger brother like Gong Jie, and a pair of sensible sons like Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen? Thank you, but I've made my decision. I hope that I can be responsible for Yu Yu. I don't want him to suffer so much for me. Why is it for you? However, Gong Jie did not agree with her. Yu Yu is not only suffering for you, he also wishes to coexist with Gong Fan, isn't that so? Xianxia was stunned. Do you think that he's protecting Gong Fan for you only because of your wishful thinking? He once told me that he feels indebted to Gong Fan. All this while, Gong Fan has suffered for him. Hence, what he's suffering now is also for Gong Fan. Xianxia did not speak for a long time. Chapter 43-22. Okay. I understand. Xianxia. The call ended. At the same time, Lisa and Gong Fan had also finished their inspection. The 10-hour flight was too tiring. Gong Jie arranged accommodation for them, gave them some instructions, and went back to rest. Hua Jin came to the door of a room. The door was ajar. Natalia, who was behind him, poked her head out. Seeing that Hua Jin did not open the door, she asked curiously, What's wrong? Why don't you open the door and go in? Okay. Could he say that he was afraid? He was afraid that once he opened the door, he would appear in the surveillance camera's range. Previously, he had heard from Gong Jie that the Gong family was heavily guarded. Other than the room, no one was allowed to step into any other place. However, the room was not a safe place either. He felt as if there were countless pairs of eyes staring at him at this moment. Seeing that Hua Jin was in a daze, Natalia walked past him and pushed the door open. When she pushed the door open, what greeted her was a luxurious room that Hua Jin had not expected. The overall style of the room was champagne-colored. Pure white curtains, white solid wood doors and windows. Upon entering the room, he saw an extremely luxurious walk-in closet. In the middle of the room was a luxurious four-poster princess bed. The champagne-colored curtains gently covered the edge of the bed, instantly giving off a dreamy feeling. This room was originally prepared by Gong Xiaoying for Xianxia. In fact, this room was secretly prepared by Gong Xiaoying many years ago for Xianxia. At that time, Gong Xiaoying did not know that Xianxia was still alive. This room was personally prepared by him for his beloved daughter. Even though Gong Xiaoying at that time had a deep understanding that perhaps this room would no longer be of use, he still kept it. All the cleaning work in the Gong family was done by the servants. Only this room was personally cleaned by Gong Xiaoying himself. After finishing his work, he would often come here to sit for a while. For a long time, this room had been spotless. Later on, he accidentally found out that Xianxia was still alive. After that, he returned to this room and sat there for the entire night. Gong Jie happened to pass by and heard Gong Xiaoying murmuring, "You're all grown up now. This room doesn't suit you anymore." Since then, the room had been left empty. However, it seemed that Gong Xiaoying rarely came. In the past, to him, this room was more like a spiritual sustenance. However, now that he knew that Xianxia was still alive, there was no reason for this room to exist anymore. However, there were many guest rooms in the Gong family and there was no shortage of rooms. Normally, there was no need to vacate this room. But since Natalia was here, Gong Jie remembered that Gong Xiaoying had prepared this room for her. So, he arranged this room for Natalia. Wow! The moment Natalia walked into the room, she threw herself onto the bed in excitement. What a beautiful bed! I like this bed. Which is prettier, the bed at home or here? Hua Jin was just asking casually, but Natalia replied without hesitation, I like the bed here. Hua Jin's eyelids twitched violently. He seemed to have heard Gong Jie mention before that this room was decorated by Gong Xiaoying. What era was Gong Xiaoying from? Chapter 43-23. Could it be that his sense of beauty couldn't catch up with the people of the previous generation? Hua Jin's confidence was instantly crushed. Knock, knock, knock. Just as Hua Jin was feeling gloomy, there was a sudden knock on the door. Turning around, he saw Alice standing at the door. The door wasn't closed, but she didn't come in either. Instead, she stood at the door and said to Hua Jin, "Is it convenient to take Natalia away?" Hearing that she was going to be taken away, Natalia immediately shrank behind Hua Jin in fear and clutched the corner of his shirt tightly. No. She didn't want to go with Alice. She was leaning against Hua Jin as if he was her savior. Hua Jin glanced at Natalia and gently held her shoulders. He stroked her hair gently and turned to ask Alice, "What's the matter?" "I want to do a checkup on Natalia." A checkup? Hua Jin couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She was on the plane for 10 hours and had to do such a long checkup. The child is exhausted. She hasn't gotten used to the environment yet and you want to take her away. Won't you? Alice heard this and crossed her arms. Why else do you think we took a 10-hour flight back here? It's not a complicated checkup either. We just want to check her basic values. We'll send her back right away. Hua Jin heard this and was speechless. Hence, he squatted down and coaxed Natalia. Go with Auntie Alice, okay? I'll wait for you here, okay? Where are we going? To do some checkup. He thought that Natalia would be unwilling and that she might cry and throw a tantrum, but she didn't. Natalia let go of his sleeve in disappointment. Her hands fell to the side as she nodded gently. Okay. She walked obediently to Alice's side. Although she was unwilling, she didn't say anything. Natalia, be good. I'll send you back later, okay? Okay. It was only when Alice took Natalia away that Hua Jin heaved a sigh of relief. However, as he wasn't familiar with this place, he stayed in the room and didn't dare to go anywhere. After such a long flight, he was extremely sleepy. Hence, he fell asleep as soon as he sat down on the sofa. Natalia and Gong Fan were brought to the laboratory. Alice first introduced the two children to the doctors in the laboratory one by one. This is Gong Fan, and this is Natalia. I've told you about them before. For a long time to come, our task will be very heavy. However, failure is not allowed. Do you hear me? Everyone was stunned and they were dumbfounded. Was not allowed failure? In the medical center, there were many experiments conducted every day. But Alice's requirements had never been so strict. Of's not allowed? How is that? Only after countless failures would one be able to sum up their experience and achieve success. Natalia leaned against Gong Fan, trembling in fear. In front of her stood a circle of people in white coats. This made her feel as though she had returned to the place where she used to be. Vaguely, she recalled the time in the hospital. The pungent smell of disinfectant, the cold faces, and the white coats that always swayed in front of her eyes. Immediately, she felt a wave of disgust. Chapter 43-24. Natalia sized him up with trepidation. Gong Fan gently held her hand. Even though he didn't say anything, he only gave her a determined look. Natalia felt comforted. It seemed that with him around, everything became less scary. Alice discussed with the specialists for a while and clapped her hands lightly. Okay, it's settled then. She turned around and looked at Natalia and Gong Fan. She immediately said, Okay, now it's my turn to introduce you to my partners. This is Manson, this is Luca, this is Zach. Natalia realized that the doctors behind Alice all looked very young. They were full of vitality. This was the medical team that Alice had set up. It was the best in the world. However, it was such a top team in the world. However, the teaching staff were all young people who were only in their 30s. Moreover, this medical team was not only loyal to Alice, but it also showed that Alice's personality was unparalleled. Unless she personally dismissed this team one day, it would definitely be a success. Now, I'm going to come up with a plan for the two of you. Before that, I need to accurately understand your physical condition. Natalia, cooperate with me, okay? Natalia asked uneasily. Will it hurt? If it hurts, it won't hurt other than taking blood. Oh. Natalia still had some lingering fear in her heart, but she still nodded resolutely. Gong Fan didn't need to say anything. He cooperated with Alice 100%. The two of them were sent for a series of examinations. At this moment, Alice suddenly received a call from Romanka. She was a little surprised that Romanka called. He rarely contacted her. Basically, if there was no special emergency, the two of them would communicate through email. Seeing that it was a call from him, Alice was a little cautious. After the call was put through, Romanka went straight to the point. How's Natalia's condition? Alice curled her lips. Everything is fine. At that moment, Natalia was right beside her. She held her phone and walked out of the room. Separated by a glass door, she made sure that Natalia couldn't hear their conversation. Then she slowly said, Professor, are you hiding something from me? On the other end, Romanka was clearly stunned for a moment. She hadn't expected her to ask such a question. Why do you ask? Do I need to tell you that? You should be clear about this. Alice didn't intend to delay any longer. She didn't want to go around in circles with Romanka. Natalia was now in her hands. From the moment she boarded the plane yesterday until today, all of Natalia's means of contacting Professor Romanka had been cut off by Alice. Therefore, Romanka could not get any information from Natarisa. It was probably because of this that he contacted her for the first time. Professor, I won't beat around the bush with you. I also hope that you can tell me the truth about everything. Romanka was silent for a while, but he only said vaguely, I don't know what you mean. Now, I'm no longer Natalia's guardian lawyer. I haven't even seen her in a long time. What do you want me to confess to you? Chapter 43-25. Confess her previous condition. Condition? Romanka pretended to be ignorant. As you can see, I've given you all the medical reports. Can't you study them yourself? Do you think I don't know? Several pages of Natalia's medical report are missing. Romanka was stunned. She was a little shocked by her words. Why? Are you surprised? Surprised that I would know that you tampered with the medical report? What do you mean by tampering? I don't understand. Alice lowered her voice and said, Several pages are missing from the report. If you didn't look at it carefully, you wouldn't have noticed it. You hid Natalia's medical report and then forged several copies of it and pasted them at the back of the report. The handwriting is too different. The previous page looks very old, and the new page is even several degrees whiter than the previous page. Do you think I'm an idiot? You? Romanka, listen to me, Alice said very seriously. No matter what, I need you to cooperate with me. You're the most authoritative professor in this field. I still have enough evidence that you used Natalia to do those inhumane experiments. If you don't cooperate with me, I'll take you to the International Court of Justice. What you'll face is not only a high amount of compensation, but also your reputation. How about it? Is this condition sincere enough? Professor Romanka was silent for a long time. After a long while, he finally sighed. The younger generation will surpass us in time. He sighed and said, "How should I meet you?" Alice smiled relaxedly and finally relaxed her eyebrows. She knew that Professor Romanka's words meant that he was willing to cooperate with her. This also meant that her negotiation was a success. Alice said loudly, "I'll send a private plane to pick you up and issue a high-level pass to Hurricane. It's my honor to be able to visit the world's top medical technology center in my lifetime." After telling him what to do and ending the call, Alice finally felt a little relieved. Professor Romanka was the world's most authoritative expert in the field of multiple personality disorder. If Lu Zhou could get his help, then his progress would be much smoother. Alice was also worried that Professor Romanka would harm Gong Fan. He seemed to have a great interest in Gong Fan. However, apart from those conspiracy theories, she was confident that she could protect Gong Fan as long as he was in her territory. Next, they could only take one step at a time. There was no need to rush Natalia's illness, but Gong Fan's situation was not optimistic. She could not wait any longer, and neither could Gong Fan. Before Professor Romanka arrived, Alice once again hypnotized Gong Fan. However, there was no breakthrough in the hypnosis. Yu Yu was also in this body and there was no news of her. Alice wasn't an authoritative expert in this field before, so she didn't know much about the world of multiple personalities. If Gong Jie had not repeatedly urged her to cure Yu Yu, she would not have dabbled in this field. However, if Professor Romanka was willing to help her, things would be much smoother. Chapter 43-26. During the half a month on the island, Gong Fan and Natalia had a relatively easy time. The two little guys got along well with the doctors in the medical center. During their free time, Hua Jin and Gong Jie would take Gong Fan and Natalia out to sea to relax. During this period of time, Xianxia would video call Gong Fan on time every night. However, the two of them were secretive about certain things. Gong Fan was well aware of his situation and cherished every day he spent with Xianxia. Even though they were half a world apart, the video call every day was the most heartwarming time for Gong Fan. Compared to the busy Gong Jie and Alice, Hua Jin was much more free. However, when he was free, he did not dare to wander around the island. It was said that the island was shrouded in a quantum defense network, and there were invisible mechanisms and alarms everywhere at any time. If they were triggered, the entire island would be armed to the teeth. Hua Jin was not familiar with the island, so he did not dare to walk around recklessly. However, the castle had all kinds of entertainment facilities. Billiard room, video room, gym. When he was free, even if Gong Jie was not around, Hua Jin would take the two little guys for a walk by the beach. Alice teased him that during this period of time, he had accumulated a certain amount of experience in taking care of children. When he had his own children in the future and became a father, he would not be flustered when it came to taking care of children. However, Hua Jin did not know whether to be happy or worried. It was hard for him to imagine that he would have a child of his own in the future. He already regarded Natalia as his own flesh and blood. Therefore, even if there was a chance in the future, out of consideration for Natalia, he might not have another child. Half a month later, Romanka successfully met up with Alice. That night, Romanka ignored the exhaustion of the flight and entered the meeting room with Alice. Other than them, no one else was allowed to enter. In the meeting room, Romanka told Alice a shocking secret. "Actually, you're right. I did hide something from you. That is..." Romanka looked up and said with a serious expression, "Actually, Natalia is the real second personality." Alice did not expect that this was what Professor Romanka wanted to tell her. When she heard this, she was in a daze for a long time and did not come back to her senses for a long time. That day, when you saw the child in my hospital, the personality that appeared was actually Natalia. Compared to Natalia, Natalia's personality was a typical sensitive one. She is fragile, sensitive, and looks cold on the outside, but she is actually very gentle on the inside. All this time, I haven't told you because I don't know how to bring this up. You're lying. Alice was a little angry. How was that possible? How could Natalia be the second personality? Alice didn't dare to believe Professor Romanka's words. Even though she had hired this person to help her treat Yu Yu, she did not dare to fully believe Romanka's words. Hua Jin had mentioned it to her before. Professor Romanka might have taught Natalia hypnotism. Then, he wanted to use Natalia to control Yu Yu. Chapter 43-27. However, she had never expected Natalia to be a second personality. "Do you think I'm lying to you?" Romanka leaned back in his chair with a serious expression. I know what you think of me. You must think that I'm an evil and unreasonable dark scientist who specializes in using weak and helpless children to conduct human experiments. Yes, Alice, to be honest, I have my own ambitions. Multiple personality disorder was still unknown in this world. In fact, there were many people with multiple personality disorder in this world. The list of people with multiple personality disorder did not include people with multiple personality disorder all over the world. In other words, the patients we have now are just the tip of the iceberg. Alice, I want to conquer this field too much, so I seem a little eager for quick success. Perhaps in your eyes, this is evil, but I don't think so. You don't have to think of me as evil. There's no need. Even though Romanka's tone seemed so sincere, Alice did not dare to believe him completely. According to what you said, could it be that Natalia's personality was created by you? Yes. Then why did you create such a personality? Alice was skeptical. This is your so-called personality society experiment? Not at all. In fact, the medical community has always believed that multiple personality disorder is a condition of nature. But I don't think that anyone can have this condition. So, I chose Natalia as the experimental subject. Natalia is a classic melancholic personality. So, in order to treat this personality disorder, I created the innocent, kind and warm Natalia. I still don't dare to believe what you said so easily. This fact was too far from the answer she knew. She could not believe that Natalia was a second personality. Then, it meant that Natalia was the main personality that would never disappear? Then, can you explain why Natalia knows hypnotism? Romanka was finally surprised when he heard this. He didn't expect Alice to be so meticulous in her discovery. How do you know that Natalia knows hypnotism? She hypnotized Hua Jin and Yu Yu. Although I don't know what level her hypnotism is at, it should be at a higher level of sober hypnotism, right? Romanka was stunned. He suddenly smiled with admiration in his eyes. As expected of Alice, your observation is so meticulous. Yes, I taught Natalia hypnotism because she has trouble sleeping. So, I taught her hypnotism and used it to control Natalia. So, it was through that crystal ball? Yes. This is unexpected. Romanka, how did you teach her? Chapter 43-28. For now, let's not talk about Natalia. Let's put this matter aside. Alice paused and leaned closer to him. She lowered her voice and asked seriously, Is there really no other way? Ha! I don't understand what you mean. Although you don't know much about Yu Yu's condition, I've mentioned it to you before. But, oh, I get it now. You want me to work with you to come up with a treatment plan for Yu Yu. But you don't seem to trust me. Look, you haven't even shown me a detailed medical report on Yu Yu. Romanka looked at her calmly, his gaze probing. She sucked in a deep breath of cold air and said firmly, There's no way I'll report Yu Yu's condition to you. Hearing this, Romanka laughed instead of getting angry. Look, you're not even willing to tell me his condition. How can I cooperate with you? Based on your words, even if you don't know his condition, you should be able to come up with a treatment plan. Alice obviously believed in Romanka's abilities. Romanka, however, laughed. What do you take me for? Do you think I'm a god? You're a doctor yourself. Don't you think it's unreasonable for you to say such things? Romanka paused and continued, If a doctor doesn't understand the patient's condition, he won't be able to come up with a treatment plan. Moreover, in the field of multiple personality disorder, it's still a difficult problem to overcome. Relatively speaking, even if the patient's medical record is complete, he may not be able to come up with a perfect treatment plan. Alice sat up in excitement. I can't delay any longer. If I really can't come up with a perfect treatment plan, then I'll use hypnosis to kill all the other personalities. Oh! Romanka's interest was piqued and he caught the main point. All the other personalities? Does this mean that he has already developed more than 3 personalities? Alice didn't expect him to be so meticulous. He actually caught the main point so quickly. You sound very anxious. It seems like Yu Yu's condition has reached a point where he can't take responsibility? Romanka observed her expression as he spoke. Finally, he laughed and said, It seems like it's not as serious as I thought. After all, you're still unwilling to disclose Yu Yu's medical record to me. It seems like it's not that bad. Alice had no choice. She had no other choice but to say honestly, "I really don't know what to do. After all, I'm not an authority in this field, but you are. Now, I want to protect both Gong Fan and Yu Yu's personalities. But something happened recently." "What's the situation?" Romanka's curious. "He was assassinated in an unknown situation." Even Romanka, who had seen a lot of the world, couldn't help but frown when he heard this. Alice didn't bother to hide it from him and recounted the events of that day in detail to him. Romanka was silent for a while and immediately said, "It seems that he has undergone the second division." Chapter 43-29. There's a situation where one personality splits into two personalities splits into four, and so on. As for how many personalities can be split, there are no detailed records at the moment. There are at most 21 known personalities recorded in the records. Can dual personality really become multiple personality disorder? To put it in simpler terms, the emergence of dual personality disorder is when there's too much pain, a person can no longer bear it. Therefore, the mental state splits into a second personality out of self-protection mechanism. Then, when dual personality disorder evolves into multiple personality disorder, it means that the mental mechanism has begun to create a personality society. This personality society can be created by the patient himself, or it can be created by the outside world through certain means. Some theories suggested that multiple personality disorder was related to childhood trauma. Internationally, children before the age of 7 were considered to be the golden age of children. If a child suffered serious mental trauma before the age of 7, it was very likely that it would lead to mental illness. Multiple personality disorder was one of the possibilities. When a person suffered a strong impact that was difficult to deal with, they might try to close their eyes and empty their mind to reach the realm of this did not happen to them. Then, they might create a personality that could replace them to bear the huge trauma and impact. This personality might immediately retaliate, become blind or deaf, scream, or curl up into a ball. Whenever similar pressure or impact appeared again, these personalities might automatically complete the transformation. Take Yu Yu as an example. Li Qin and Yun Na's bullying in childhood. These tragic experiences tore apart a healthy Yu Yu mentally, prompting the establishment of another personality. The two personalities could each perform their own duties and replace Yu Yu to deal with different situations. Each personality of a patient with multiple personality disorder was stable, complete, and had different thinking patterns and memories. These split personalities were all-encompassing. They could be of different genders, ages, races, and even species. They took turns to control the patient's behavior. When the other personalities were controlling the behavior, the original personality might be unaware of what it had done during this period of time. This would lead to a serious time loss phenomenon. If the split personalities knew of each other's existence, it was called coexisting consciousness. They could even sit down for a meeting. My suggestion is that we use brain imaging to observe patients with multiple personality disorder. The difference in brain imaging between patients with dissociative identity disorder and patients with high and low hallucinations is very obvious. Then, what do you think Yu Yu's situation should be? Do you want my suggestion? Alice nodded solemnly. If you really want to keep two personalities, it's not impossible. Treating multiple personality disorder was a difficult and very individualized process. Scientists and doctors had tried many methods for different patients. One of the most famous methods was personality fusion. The therapist understood and analyzed the patient's different personalities to find an internal personality that was familiar with all the personalities. It was usually called the internal helper, and become the core personality. Chapter 43-30. However, even if the treatment was successful, the personality might disintegrate again due to external pressure. In addition, because the patient was highly suggestible, hypnosis was often used to summon the patient's different personalities for treatment. However, this was not a cure for the root cause. It was just a supplementary method. In fact, internal disintegration was not a special thing. It was a very common phenomenon. Ordinary people had experienced internal disintegration. For example, reading a wonderful novel and being completely immersed in the plot, completely unaware of what was happening around them. There were also daydreaming, meditation, forgetfulness, and so on. However, this was not an illness, but an ordinary daily mental activity. However, multiple personality disorder was already the extreme of such a state. I got it. Alice stood up. Then, let's start with the brain imaging. She had not done a brain imaging on Yu Yu yet. The Hurricane Medical Center was very well equipped. Therefore, no matter what kind of examination it was, it would not be difficult. As long as Yu Yu was willing to cooperate. Romanka nodded. After that, Alice and Gong Fan had a discussion. When Gong Fan heard that he was going to do a brain imaging, he was initially a little resistant. However, after Alice explained what a brain imaging was, Gong Fan agreed to do it. It was not that he did not trust Alice, but he did not trust Romanka very much. However, with Alice around, the little guy still gave her some face. Alice brought Gong Fan into the examination room. In the examination room, there was no light. Only the faint blue light was quietly lit. In the huge examination room, there was only a very large instrument. It looked like an MRI, but it was not an MRI. The two instruments looked very similar. Alice instructed Gong Fan to lie down. His head was placed in a white helmet. Alice pressed the button and Gong Fan felt himself being slowly pushed in. Lie down obediently. I won't say anything. Don't move. Okay. Gong Fan was very obedient and agreed. Alice walked out of the door. Professor Romanka sat in front of the display screen and looked at the brain imaging screen. On the blank screen, a few black dots were listed. Look here. Professor Romanka gently tapped on the screen. The brain imaging differences between patients with dissociative identity disorder and those with high and low hallucinations are very significant. DID indicates dissociative identity disorder, CH indicates high hallucinations, CL indicates low hallucinations, TIS indicates trauma-related status, and NIS indicates neutral status. Alice looked at the image and sucked in a breath of cold air. Does this mean that there are 5 personalities residing in Yu Yu's body? There are 4 active personalities. 4. How is that possible? Alice obviously did not believe him. Usually, only Yu Yu and Gong Fan can change their personalities. Including the personalities that appeared that day, there should be at most 3 of them. How did the 4 of them come about? Are you sure you'll be able to distinguish the other personalities based on their appearance? When Alice heard this, she felt a chill run down her spine. Based on what you're saying, the other personalities have already appeared unknowingly, but we just didn't notice it? Just thinking about it made Alice realize how terrifying multiple personalities were. If there was a disguised personality, he would have been lurking for so long. Chapter 43:31. How would you be able to detect it? Romanka said half-jokingly, when other personalities appear, there won't be much change in appearance. At most, there will be a change in temperament. However, temperament is abstract. Moreover, you have already determined that the child has dual personalities, so naturally, you won't think of anything else. Alice frowned. So, you're saying that he has 5 personalities? No, what I mean is that there are at least 4 active personalities. Then the personalities that haven't been imaged may not be shown, but as time passes, these personalities will appear like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. However, this will take time. However, the 4 personalities are at least active. Alice asked worriedly, then, do you think that the other personalities will have disguised behavior? I'm not sure about this. However, if we follow logical reasoning, it might be possible. Alice's expression became even more serious. What should we do? Romanka pondered for a moment. If you trust me, then submit his file to me. I'll try to come up with a treatment plan. I'm very interested in him, but don't worry. I won't do any messy experiments on him. I'll be careful. Alice hesitated for a long time. Romanka was also very patient. He looked at her quietly. Finally, he saw that she nodded reluctantly. Okay, I'll trust you this time. Alice brought Professor Romanka to the archives room. She pushed open the heavy door. There were dozens of rows of tall bookshelves in the archives room. It was all-encompassing and stored a lot of patient information and medical literature. Romanka was not in a hurry to urge Alice to look for Yu Yu's medical report. As soon as he stepped into the archives room, his eyes widened in surprise. This is unbelievable. It's like a treasure trove. It's not wrong to say that it's a treasure trove. Ordinary people don't have the right to set foot in here. Even in my medical team, there are only a few people who have the right to set foot in here. Then I would be honored. Alice led Yu Yu to a row of filing cabinets. The filing room was filled with high-tech elements. There were automatic bookshelves and pupil scans. Alice entered the relevant information and soon, Yu Yu's medical report was pushed out. Alice carefully handed the medical report to Romanka and said in a deep voice, "Professor, we might as well try peaceful means before resorting to force. This file is very important, and it's the only one. You have to keep it properly. Also, if you have any ulterior motives toward Yu Yu, we won't tolerate it." "Now, my personal freedom is in your hands," Professor Romanka said helplessly. "Aren't you being too defensive?" "I have no choice but to be on guard." Alice revealed her true feelings. Some researchers are willing to give up their lives and dignity for the sake of research. The truth is extremely important. For detectives, the results of their deductions are more important than their lives. Then, for medical scientists, if they can study difficult diseases in this field, of course, it's more important than their lives. Now that science is so advanced, you should know what it's built on. Chapter 43-32. Alice said softly, "It's built on countless failed experiments." "Okay. But no matter what, you can't be a test subject. I hope you can make a clear distinction." "I understand." After Alice and Romanka's meeting ended, it was already very late. At this time, Gong Fan and Natalia had already gone back to rest. After leaving the research room, Alice stared at Romanka's back view and called for her right-hand man. "Ricky, send someone to keep an eye on him." "Yes." The assistant behind her was very strict. He asked in confusion, "Are you still worried about him?" "Not really. The main thing is that I have to be wary of Romanka, this old fox." Alice was very reluctant to hand over Yu Yu's medical report to Romanka. But now, other than this, she couldn't think of a better solution. She could only hope that this old fox could come up with a useful solution. Romanka took the medical report and locked himself in the room. He was cooped up for more than a week. In this week, Yu Yu and Gong Fan's personalities switched back and forth a few times. When Yu Yu woke up just now, he saw himself on the island and was quite frightened. Early in the morning, Gong Jie was awakened by a commotion. He walked out of the room and saw Yu Yu in his pajamas, standing in the corridor in a daze. He looked around and a group of people followed behind him. They were holding their coats in fear, afraid that the crown prince would catch a cold. Gong Jie walked over in confusion, thinking that he was Yu Yu. However, when he turned around and the little guy spoke, Gong Jie instantly recognized that the child in front of him was not Gong Fan but Yu Yu. "Uncle? Why am I here?" Gong Jie was also very surprised, but he quickly calmed down. He waved the servants away and took the cotton slippers and coat. The corridor was paved with marble. Gong Jie was worried that he would catch a cold, so he squatted down patiently and said to him, "Stretch out your leg." Yu Yu obediently stretched out his feet and let him put on his shoes and coat for him. He looked up and asked in confusion, "Why am I here? Is this Ashland Island?" "No. This is a hurricane." "Hurricane? Didn't you come here before?" Gong Jie did not think much of it. Yu Yu turned around and looked at the unfamiliar corridor. Even though he had been here before, he had never been to a castle before. He could not react to such a grand and majestic style. Yu Yu looked around in confusion, still unable to understand. "Why am I in hurricane?" Gong Jie then realized that Yu Yu seemed to know nothing about Yun Shishi's injury. What he did not expect was that Yun Shishi had been stabbed and was lying in a hospital bed at this moment. Gong Jie was a little hesitant. He did not know if he should tell him about this. However, Yu Yu was extremely sensitive. He looked at Gong Jie's hesitant expression and raised his eyebrows suspiciously. "Did something happen to Mommy?" The boy was so agitated that he tugged at the corner of his shirt and asked anxiously, "What exactly happened? Tell me, tell me." "Your mommy is injured." Yu Yu was shocked and his face turned pale. "Injured? How did she get injured? Don't you have any consciousness at all?" Yu Yu sucked in a breath of cold air when he heard that. Chapter 43-33. What exactly happened? Tell me quickly. Everyone suspects that Gong Fan stabbed her. That day, for some reason, Gong Fan lost control of his emotions and was sent to the hospital for emergency treatment because he accidentally took an overdose of painkillers. Gong Jie recounted everything that had happened to Yu Yu, no matter how big or small. "But don't worry, your mommy is fine now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to stand in front of you so calmly. Yu knew that Gong Jie cared about Xianxia as much as he did. When he heard this, he calmed down and lowered his head. No one knew what he was thinking. Gong Jie asked tentatively, "What do you think?" "I think this matter is very strange. I think that when Mommy was stabbed, it was definitely not Gong Fan's personality. But it's impossible. Dual personality. How could there be other personalities living in my body? Then, I can't be sure if those personalities are dangerous. So, we brought you back to Hurricane. Alice has already worked with Romanka to think of a treatment plan." Yu's expression became even more solemn. He leaned against the railing and frowned. "What did Alice say?" "She didn't say anything to me. There doesn't seem to be any progress." In that case, Gong Jie couldn't help but be surprised that he didn't suspect Gong Fan. "Haven't you ever suspected that Gong Fan did this?" "Impossible." "Why?" Yu took a deep breath. "He cares about Mommy no less than you or me. I'm different. Other than Mommy, I have other people I care about. But other than Mommy, he doesn't care about anything. How could he do something to hurt Mommy?" "Impossible." Yu trusted Gong Fan more than anyone else. Since he was already on this island, it meant that he would have to cooperate with the treatment for a long time and wouldn't be able to go back. Since he was already here, he might as well make the best of it. Yu cooperated with everything. However, there was one thing that he insisted on. If the treatment plan had to kill Gong Fan's personality, then he would be the first to be unwilling. He believed that if Gong Fan died, his soul would be incomplete. Gong Fan and he were complete. The method he hoped for the most was for the two personalities to merge together. This was the most ideal state for both him and Gong Fan. During this period, Gong Fan and Yu's personalities switched back and forth a few times. 2 weeks later, Romanka finally walked out of the room and mentioned to Alice that he wanted to do a hypnosis experiment. When it comes to hypnosis, Alice is very cautious. Romanka knows her worries, so she mentioned that she can also be present during the hypnosis experiment. "What kind of hypnosis experiment was it?" "I want to create an illusion through hypnosis and summon the personalities of Gong Fan and Yu to meet each other." Roman paused for a moment before continuing. "However, during the hypnosis process, we can't rule out the possibility that other personalities will appear in the dream." "That's very dangerous." Alice realized the dangerous nature of this experiment. If other more dangerous personalities appeared in this dream and caused harm to Yu and Gong Fan, as outsiders, they couldn't interfere at all. Romanka nodded. "Before any experiment is mature, there will be risks. I have to make this clear to you. But there's no other way. This experiment has to be carried out." Chapter 43-34. That evening, Alice brought Yu into the laboratory to wait for Romanka's arrival. Sitting in the laboratory, Yu was obviously a little uneasy. He confirmed again, "I will be able to see Gong Fan in this hypnosis, right?" "Yes." Yu suddenly felt a little nervous. Before this, he had learned from Alice that there were other personalities living in his body. This meant that the chances of him meeting the other personalities in this dream would be very high. In other words, he might meet the other personalities before meeting Gong Fan. "Are you sure that the people I saw in my dreams under hypnosis are my other personalities?" "Yes." "Then, if that personality looks the same as the other personalities, how can I tell them apart?" The reason why he asked this was because Gong Fan had written in his diary that he had dreamed of someone who looked exactly like Yu chasing after him. Gong Fan had suspected that this person was Yu. However, when he knew that there might be other personalities living in this body, he started to have doubts. Perhaps the personality who looked exactly like Yu was someone else. Yu suspected that there were two personalities living in his body that looked exactly like him. The appearance of multiple personalities might be the same, but the chances of them being different were higher. For example, there was a patient who had more than 10 personalities living in his body. However, these personalities had different appearances. There was a blonde girl, a middle-aged man, and even an FBI detective. Each of them played a different role. Alice felt a headache coming on. "Yu, your condition is more complicated, so I can't say who you will meet in this hypnosis. However, you have to be vigilant." "Why do you say that?" Alice said with a serious expression. "Because in the dream, other than you, if the other personalities are fatally injured, they will disappear completely." Yu Yu quickly understood what she meant and couldn't help but shudder. He didn't expect that this experiment would be so risky. He was a little scared. You mean that if someone kills Gong Fan in my dream, his personality will really disappear completely? Yes. What about me? You won't disappear. You have to remember this forever. Alice suddenly became agitated. Yu Yu was shocked by her nervous expression. First of all, you have to remember that you are the main personality. In the dream, no matter what attacks you encounter, you will never disappear and never die. No matter what kind of injuries you suffer, even if it is real, you can't believe it, otherwise. Otherwise what? Otherwise, you will never wake up and let the other personalities occupy your body. Yu Yu couldn't help but gasp. Chapter 43-35. Yu Yu nodded solemnly. He didn't know why, but his heart felt heavy. I understand. I'll do my best to protect Gong Fan. When Alice heard this, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Idiot, you just have to protect yourself. But as you said, even if I die in the dream, I still exist in the real world. But Gong Fan's life is in danger. I have to protect him. When Alice heard this, she fell silent for a while. She didn't know why, but she thought of Xianxia's previous worries. She couldn't help but ask indirectly, if one day, everyone gives up on Gong Fan, what will you do? Why would you give up on him? Yu Yu expressed his confusion. I will never give up on Gong Fan. He is another me. He is the other half of my soul. If he disappears, then no matter how outstanding I am, I will be incomplete. Alice nodded in relief and scratched the bridge of his nose. Yu Yu, you are such a gentle child. Soon, Professor Romanka arrived. He brought some tools necessary for hypnosis. When he walked into the room, he stood in front of Yu Yu and asked with concern, Are you ready? Yes. This is a cup of milk tea. Professor Romanka passed the milk tea in his hand to him. Drink this milk tea. There is a small dose of sleeping pills in it. It's not much. Before entering the hypnosis experiment, Yu Yu had to take some sleeping pills. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to enter the hypnosis in a good state when he was extremely awake. Yu Yu had just taken a sip of the milk tea when Romanka had already set up a dim table lamp. He turned on the table lamp, walked to the window, and drew the curtains. The huge room suddenly fell into a dead silence and darkness. The only light left was the table lamp in front of Yu Yu. It was extremely weak. After drinking the milk tea, Yu Yu still didn't feel much. He didn't feel sleepy either. He had enough sleep, so he was very awake. Professor Romanka sat down before him and greeted him in a friendly manner. Yu Yu, hello, I'm Romanka. He extended his hand to Yu Yu as if he was greeting a gentleman. Yu Yu shook his outstretched hand and smiled. Hello. Next, we're going to start our experiment. Are you ready? Yes. All right, then let me tell you a story. First, lean back on the chair and relax your body. Yes, very good. He instructed Yu Yu to adjust her condition. Then he softened his voice. Don't breathe too quickly. Be quiet. Be quiet. Slowly adjust your breathing rate. He placed a piano metronome on the table and adjusted the rhythm. Then, he instructed Yu Yu to adjust her breathing according to the rhythm of the metronome. Next, Romanka began to tell him stories. It was a very boring fairy tale. Yu Yu didn't know why Romanka was telling this story. Wasn't it supposed to be a hypnosis experiment? Why was he telling a story? However, only Alice knew that Romanka's hypnosis had officially begun without Yu Yu noticing. Chapter 43-36. Yu Yu didn't know when he lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he opened his eyes and realized that he was in a huge ward. The reason why he knew that he was in a ward was because when he opened his eyes, all he could see was a snow-white color. He could even vaguely smell the smell of disinfectant. His mind was in a daze. It took him a long time to adjust and realize that he was in the world that Romanka had hypnotized him. Was this a dream? Or was it a different dimension? He remembered that Alice had told him that after hypnosis, he had to keep his guard up against the people he met in this world. What might appear in this world might be the hidden and dangerous personality in his body. Yu Yu immediately became alert. He got out of bed and looked around. After confirming that there was no one else in the ward, he began to rummage through the room. The ward was very big, and it was fully equipped with everything that was needed. In addition to the usual facilities in a hospital, there was medicine, needles. Yu was a little scared. He was especially afraid of such a space. He had been in the hospital since he was young and hated such an environment. Now that he was in such a space, it was inevitable that his heart would palpitate. Professor Romanka had said that he would summon Gong Fan's personality. However, if Gong Fan appeared, then the other personalities might appear as well. Moreover, he could not tell from his appearance whether it was Gong Fan or another personality if it was someone who looked exactly like Gong Fan. Yu picked up the scalpel on the cart and walked to the door. He carefully pushed it open. After pushing the door open, there was a spacious corridor outside. There was a long corridor on both sides. From his angle, he couldn't tell where the end of the corridor led to. Opposite the corridor was a row of floor-to-ceiling windows. However, the strange thing was that although the sunlight outside the window was bright and warm, it couldn't penetrate the window. It was as if it was isolated by an invisible enchantment. The sunlight outside the window was bright and beautiful, but it couldn't shine through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Therefore, the corridor was especially dark. Yu walked to the window and pushed it open. A strong gust of wind rushed in. He looked down and was surprised to find that the floor he was on was more than 10 meters above the ground. At a glance, it was about 5 stories high. Yu closed the door and looked around. After weighing the pros and cons, she finally decided to walk to the right. "Because I'm Yu," he muttered in his heart. This was probably a form of joy in the midst of bitterness. As he walked, he suddenly heard footsteps overlapping with his own. His hearing was exceedingly sharp. Alertly, he stopped in his tracks and leaned against the wall, trying to listen carefully to where the footsteps were coming from. What was even more frightening was that, when he stopped in his tracks, the footsteps stopped in an instant too. Could it be the echo of his footsteps? Was he so sensitive that he mistook the echoes as someone else's footsteps? Impossible. The sound of footsteps was much faster than his own. Yu took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Chapter 43-37. Alice had once said that no matter what happened to him in the dream, he was the main personality and would never die. Perhaps because of this, he was fearless and Yu had become more daring. He leaned against the wall and moved his feet slightly, listening carefully for the echo of his footsteps. There was no echo. Hence, he was relieved and started to walk freely with the intention of testing the waters. However, it didn't take long for the strange footsteps to be heard again. Moreover, it overlapped with his footsteps. Yu tried to distinguish the footsteps from behind. He pretended to be calm as he walked. Then, he suddenly turned around and looked behind him. In the distance, a black figure flashed past the end of the corridor. Obviously, the black figure was very alert. After realizing that he had been discovered, he quickly went into a room from the corridor. The door of the ward was not open. Hence, the black figure seemed to be sticking close to the door and curling himself up. Yu suddenly felt his limbs turn cold. This person was obviously following him. But, what was his motive for following him? Yu took half a step back, suspecting the identity of the black figure. Could it be Gong Fan? Yu called out carefully, "Gong Fan." For a while, there was no movement. He stared in that direction as he slowly retreated, luring him out. When he moved, the black figure seemed to have heard the footsteps and thought that he had left. Hence, he appeared again. Yu saw the black figure slowly appear at the end of the corridor. Even though they were far apart, he could clearly feel that the person's eyes met his. Yu could not see his face clearly, but he could clearly feel that the black figure was slightly stunned. "Gong Fan, is that you?" His voice was slightly louder. The black shadow's footsteps paused. Then, it slowed down a little and walked towards him. Could it really be Gong Fan? Yu thought and walked towards him nervously. However, halfway there, he could clearly feel that the black figure's footsteps had quickened. No! He was not Gong Fan. Gong Fan was about the same height as him, but this black shadow was quite tall. Yu estimated that the black shadow was an adult male who was at least 1.8 meters tall. How could Gong Fan be so tall? It was not Gong Fan. Then who could he be? Yu suddenly remembered the dangerous personality that Professor Romanka had mentioned. Could this be it? Oh no! Could it be another personality? Yu took a few steps back and suddenly realized that the black figure had sped up and was walking towards him. He knew that something was wrong and turned to run. He had only taken a few steps when the black shadow behind him quickened its pace. Yu broke out in cold sweat. He almost didn't dare to look back as he desperately picked up the path and ran. At this moment, the huge hospital had become the battlefield of this chase. In such a big hospital, he almost didn't have time to think about where to go out. Seeing that the door of a room was open, he rushed in without thinking, turned around and locked the door. Yu nervously leaned against the wall as he listened to the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. Then when he reached the door, he suddenly paused as if he was judging something. Chapter 43:38. Who was this person? Just now, when they had looked at each other from afar, Yu could clearly sense a murderous look in his eyes. While holding his breath, Yu could clearly feel that the person outside the door had tried to turn the doorknob, but when he realized that the door was locked, he turned around and left. As the footsteps faded away, Yu heaved a sigh of relief and let out a long sigh. He's finally gone. Yu leaned against the door and turned around, only to realize that there was someone else in the room. It was a very big ward. Yu walked in quietly and suddenly saw someone sitting on the bed. It was a girl. She had long black hair that fell over her shoulders. She had delicate features and looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. However, there was a hint of Xianxia in her eyes. She was leaning against the bed and looking out of the window. Her gaze was blank, so much so that even after Yu had entered the room, she did not notice his presence. She was wearing a hospital gown and was hugging her knees as she sat on the bed. She looked a little weak and pitiful. Perhaps because of the girl, Yu's vigilance was slightly reduced. However, at the same time, he felt that something was amiss. Why would such a girl appear in his dreams? Could it be that this was one of his personalities? Yu was a little suspicious. Who are you? Ah! Yu's sudden voice startled her. The girl lifted her head and looked at him helplessly. When she saw that it was Yu, she calmed down a little. Who are you? My name is Yu. Yu. The girl tilted her head. Obviously, this name was a little unfamiliar to her. My name is Xianxia. Xianxia. Yu smiled. What a nice name. He tried to get closer to her. Seeing that the girl didn't seem to reject him, he moved a little faster. He walked to the bed, but there was no place to sit. When the girl saw this, she immediately moved to the side considerately, leaving one side of the bed empty. Yu immediately said, "Thank you." Thus, he sat down on the edge of the bed. The girl smiled at him, but from her pale face, it was obvious that her body was not well. What happened to you? Yu was puzzled. You don't look well. Are you sick? The girl shook her head and hesitated for a moment before nodding. What happened? You're right, but it doesn't seem right. I'm sick, but I don't know what illness I have. Anyway, in my impression, I've always been locked in the ward. Not going anywhere? Yes, it's just me. Xianxia smiled. Actually, it's quite good like this. Although it's lonely and boring, sometimes I feel cheerful when I lean against the window and look out. Yu followed her gaze and looked out of the window. The view of the garden outside the window gave him a sense of déjà vu. It was as if in his memory, when he was young, he had been in the hospital all year round. He had been guarding a window all day long, and through this window, he could see the view of the back garden. In the spring, many children who came to visit their relatives would play on the lawn. There was a gentle breeze and many kites flew in the sky, but he could only watch helplessly. Don't you feel lonely? Chapter 43:39. As the girl spoke, she raised her head and looked at him suspiciously. Who are you? Why haven't I seen you before? Yu did not know how to explain. He immediately changed the topic and asked, Are you alone? Don't you have other family members? Yes. Xianxia did not think too much and did not notice Yu's intention to change the topic. She answered his question. I have a sister called Ran. Ran? Yes. But my sister always bullies me, so I'm a little afraid of her. If you see her, you don't have to tell her that I'm here. I don't want to see her. In other words, the various people in Yu's childhood memories will become the shadows of the personalities in his body. Alice touched her nose gently and came to this conclusion. Professor Romanka nodded. That's about it. After Yu fell asleep, Romanka put on a brain monitor for Yu Yu. At the same time, he used it to check his physical condition in his dream. Furthermore, he could also check the situation of the personalities that appeared. Through the test, Alice found that Yu Yu's brainwave frequency was sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes calm, and sometimes fluctuating violently. Fluctuating violently meant that he was afraid. Alice did not know what Yu Yu saw in his dream to cause such strong emotional fluctuations. She sighed. Wouldn't it be great if I could enter his dream? If you interfere at this time, Yu Yu might go crazy. Go crazy. Alice felt that it was a little unbelievable. Is there any scientific basis for this? For example, Yu Yu's mental strength is like a few orderly highways, and the different personalities are like speeding cars on the highway. If you interfere, what will happen when the cars drive into the other highways in the opposite direction? Collision. If his mental state is damaged, it will lead to disorder. Therefore, the consequences will be unimaginable. Of course, not everyone will be like this, but just in case, I don't recommend interfering with him. Understood. Romanka's explanation was easy to understand, so she could easily understand what he meant. Alice sat down on a chair not far from Yu Yu. She looked a little dejected. So you're saying that we can only watch from the sidelines and can't do anything? Yes. This is a deep level of hypnosis. It's different from the superficial hypnosis you did before. You can't interfere. You can only wait and see. Can you wake him up? Yes, but it needs to be done in a professional way. Alice was still a little uneasy. She wasn't an authority in this field, but Romanka was. If he secretly did something, she might not be able to detect it. It was because of this that she felt uneasy. Until now, she still couldn't completely trust Romanka. However, there was nothing she could do except ask Romanka for help. He could only pray secretly, hoping that things would develop smoothly. Romanka also sat down next to her. He knew that Alice was worried about him, so she didn't want to leave. However, he didn't mind. Chapter 43:40. Alice looked at Yu Yu quietly. Although she didn't show it on her face, she was praying that Yu Yu and Gong Fan would be able to get through this safely. At night, Yu Yu suddenly woke up. Alice was pleasantly surprised that he had woken up. She couldn't hold it in anymore. She had too many questions that she wanted to ask. However, Yu Yu had just woken up and was still in a daze. Hence, she forced herself to calm down. How are you, Yu Yu? Do you feel better? Are you more awake? Be quiet first. Romanka gestured for her to be quiet. Then, he brought a glass of milk and placed it in front of Yu Yu. However, little did he know that little Munchkin looked up and scanned his surroundings. He muttered to himself, "Where is this?" Then he turned around and looked at him deeply. His gaze was obviously a little confused. I am not Yu Yu. Alice and Romanka were both stunned. Gong Fan saw their strange expressions and couldn't help but worry. What's wrong with Yu Yu? Did something happen? What's going on? Alice looked at Romanka worriedly. She seemed a little anxious. Then, where's Yu Yu? Romanka also didn't expect this to happen. After all, no matter what kind of experiment it was, there would always be some unexpected accidents in every experiment. Now, he had encountered a troublesome problem. He had hypnotized Yu Yu, hoping that Yu Yu would enter the dream realm and find Gong Fan. Also, the two of them would work together in the dream realm to explore the potential personalities in his body. However, it was still an hour earlier than the time he should have woken up. What made Romanka and Alice even more unprepared was that the person who woke up was Gong Fan. This meant that Yu Yu was trapped in the dream realm. If Yu Yu wanted to wake up, now that Gong Fan had taken over his body, he would not be able to return to his original position. Romanka and Alice looked at each other worriedly. Gong Fan looked at them strangely and asked nervously, "What's going on?" It's like this. We were originally conducting an experiment. Romanka explained the purpose of their experiment in detail. Gong Fan was very smart and immediately understood their intentions. In addition, he had heard Alice mention that they wanted to do such an experiment before, so he gladly accepted it. Alice said that Yu Yu's ideal state was for the two best personalities, Yu Yu and Gong Fan, to merge together. That would be the best outcome. He also agreed with this plan. However, in other words, if I suddenly wake up in this experiment and take over the body, You won't be able to come back, right? Alice said hesitantly. Yes, but it shouldn't be a big deal. No, it's dangerous. Romanka suddenly interrupted Alice. This time, Yu didn't sleep much as usual. I hypnotized him to enter the XY dimension, hoping that he can find the other personalities. When the time is up, he better come back. If he stays in that dimension for too long, I'm afraid that those dangerous personalities will appear and harm him. Alice said doubtfully, the main personality will never disappear, right? Chapter 43-41. Are you sure? Romanka questioned. Although I also believe that the main personality won't disappear, there's always a chance. Although there's a chance, once it happens, it'll be an irreversible outcome. Alice was stunned and became even more nervous. Then what should we do now? Gongfan suggested, why don't you hypnotize me and I'll go to that world too? No. Romanka said, you're already in that world. Even without hypnosis, you'll still go to that world when you fall asleep. However, if you're hypnotized frequently, your mental strength will decline greatly. Gongfan insisted, if I can't hypnotize you repeatedly, then I'll try to fall asleep myself. Is that feasible? When Romanka heard this, he encouraged him and said, try it. Gongfan nodded, lay on the chair and closed his eyes. However, the stronger person's goal was, the more active the surface of the brain was. Therefore, it was harder for him to fall asleep. Gongfan couldn't fall asleep no matter what and couldn't help but feel anxious. He tossed and turned, but his consciousness became clearer and clearer. Romanka saw that he was forcing himself and sighed. If you can't fall asleep no matter what, don't force yourself too much. Gongfan opened his eyes, which were bloodshot. I'm worried about him. Alice asked, do you still remember where you were before you woke up? I think I was on an island. An island? Alice was a little puzzled. Do you still remember what was on the island? Let me think. Gongfan pursed his lips and thought hard, trying to recall the scene before he woke up. I think there was a very beautiful manor. Manor? Yes, but there were other things outside the manor. However, I usually only stayed in the manor and didn't go anywhere. Are you alone? Romanka perked up. Did you see anyone else? No. I'm alone. The island is located on a sea and there's a port. I don't know what's outside the manor. I've never walked out of the manor. I see. Oh, I remember. There was a car. Gongfan frowned. I remember that I tried to open the car door and drive out, but the car seemed to be locked. I couldn't find the key, so I didn't bother about it after that. In his memory, even though there was no butler, no servants, and no maids in the manor, everything seemed to be in order and was taken care of very delicately. The manor was filled with Chinese roses. This was Xianxia's favorite flower. It seemed to have been projected into the dream world. When Alice was at a loss, Romanka suddenly asked, are you hungry? Gongfan was stunned. Hungry, I'm a little hungry. Eat something. Then. Gongfan was puzzled by his calmness. What about you? At the moment, I don't have any good ideas. I can only wait for you to fall asleep. Then wait and see. Waiting here won't change anything. Alice originally wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, she couldn't think of any feasible way. She could only eat first. Chapter 43-42. After dinner, they rested for a while. Then, Alice dragged Gongfan to play tennis for a while. Previously, when Gongfan was recuperating on Ashland Island, whenever Alice came to the island, she would play tennis with him for half a day. Firstly, she wanted him to exercise and train his body. Secondly, she wanted him to find some hobbies and interests. Unexpectedly, Gongfan really fell in love with tennis. At that time, Alice was not around every day. When she was not around, Gongfan would let Lisa play tennis with him. Now, Gongfan knew that Alice dragged him to play tennis because she wanted him to use up his excess energy so that he could fall asleep faster later. Gongjie and Lisa were also there. Alice could not take it anymore. She had been in the laboratory for a long time and had not exercised for such a long time. Hence, after a few rounds, she was already panting from exhaustion. When Gongjie saw the two of them playing tennis, he became interested. Coincidentally, Alice was taking a break. Hence, he took the tennis racket from Alice and asked if Gongfan wanted to take a break. However, Gong Fan said, "Just don't be a disappointment like Alice." When Gong Jie heard that his nephew had put up a banner for him, he was instantly filled with the desire to win. "All right, when the time comes, let's see who's the real loser." Gong Jie waved his racket and started playing with Gong Fan. Don't say that. Gong Jie had really underestimated this nephew of his. In his impression, Gong Fan, who was also known as Yu Yu, did not have a good physique. However, on Ashland Island, Gong Fan's physique had improved tremendously. Fortunately, Gong Jie was also good at sports. Otherwise, he might not be Gong Fan's match. However, in terms of tennis skills, Gong Jie relied on the strength of an adult and his height of 1.9 meters to suppress Gong Fan to a certain extent. After the tennis match, except for Gong Jie, everyone was exhausted. Gong Fan did not leave the stage the entire time. He was forcing himself to use up all his excess energy. This way, he would have a certain amount of excess energy when it came to sleeping at night. However, although this move was crude and brainless, it had a certain effect. At night, Gong Fan took a shower before lying down on the bed. The moment his head touched the pillow, he fell asleep not long after. After entering the dream, he looked around and realized that he had returned to the manor. He had fallen asleep. However, even if he were to fall asleep, the boy would probably not wake up any time soon. That was because his body was too tired from overexertion. However, Romanka had said that Yu Yu had come to his dimension. Even though he could not differentiate between dimensions, nor could he accurately understand them, he could vaguely sense that he might be able to find Yu Yu in this dream. This way, even if he could not send Yu Yu back to the real world, he could still do his best to protect Yu Yu. Gong Fan pushed the door open and went to the garage. He found that the car was still there. The car was a Mustang sports car. The door was locked and he needed a key. Gong Fan remembered Romanka's words and went back to the room to search for the key. The manor was huge. However, Gong Fan was very familiar with this place. He went to the living room and rummaged through the cabinets. He found many keys. He identified them carefully and finally found the car key. He went to the garage and successfully opened the car door. Chapter 43-43. Although he was young and did not have a driver's license, it was not difficult to drive. There were not many complicated routes and road plans on the island. In addition, the car was automatic. One step on the accelerator and one step on the brake. He just needed to grasp the direction. Gong Fan got into the car and adjusted it to a suitable seat. He put the car in gear and stepped on the accelerator. He successfully drove the car out of the garage and away from the manor. Outside the manor, there was a long asphalt road. There were no cars on it. Gong Fan drove slowly along the road. There were some mountains on the island, but the mountain roads were not narrow. It was not difficult to drive. As Gong Fan drove, he looked out of the window. Unknowingly, he drove to a cliff. It was a dead end. Gong Fan sighed and had no choice but to turn the car around. The gauge showed that there was not much fuel left. There was no navigation here, so he could only activate the fuel-saving mode and step on the accelerator carefully, searching for a gas station along the way. After driving for about 7 to 8 kilometers, he finally saw a gas station. He parked the car and got out, but he did not find any staff at the gas station. The huge gas station was empty. There was no one there. Therefore, he filled up the gas himself until the dashboard showed that the gas level was full. He drove in the opposite direction of the dead end and the manor. There was no one on the huge island. It only gave off an inexplicable feeling of desolation. The sky unknowingly darkened. Usually, he only stayed in the manor and did not go anywhere. He did not expect the island to be so big. After driving for so long, he did not see anything beyond the mountains. Now that the sky was gradually darkening, Gong Fan felt that it was too dangerous to drive in the dark. Moreover, he did not find anything. Therefore, he thought that he should turn back and wait until after tonight. However, when he turned back, because the sky was dark, there were suddenly dots of light in the distance that attracted his attention. Gong Fan slowed down the car and looked out of the window. He saw that the place where the lights were lit up was actually a few taller buildings. There was a huge Red Cross sign hanging on the roof. It seemed to be a hospital? Hospital? Gong Fan frowned. It was still not too late. Therefore, he took the opportunity to drive in the direction of the hospital. Although the hospital was close by from afar, the road on the island was very long. However, The roads on the island were winding and they wasted a lot of time on the way. By the time they arrived at the hospital, it was already late at night. He parked the car a little further away from the hospital and walked to the entrance of the hospital. However, he saw that only a few rows of the hospital were lit. The rest of the rooms were dark. Is there anyone in the hospital? How was that possible? Alice said that the dimension he was in was an XY dimension, and anyone who appeared in it was use other personalities. Could it be that there were other personalities in the hospital? If that was the case, could it be that the dangerous personality that attacked Xianxia that day was also there? Gong Fan instantly raised his guard, lightened his footsteps, and sneaked into the hospital. The lights in the main hall of the hospital were not on, but the corridor was lit with dim yellow lights. It was unknown whether it was because of the lack of maintenance, but the light bulb was sometimes on and sometimes not, and the light was very bright. Chapter 43-44. At a glance, he felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. It was terrifying. Gong Fan stood in the hall in a daze, but he did not dare to speak. He gently took a step forward. When his shoes landed on the ground, they would echo in the air. He did not dare to take the elevator, but other than the elevator, it seemed that he could only walk up the stairs. He did not know why he wanted to go upstairs, but he vaguely had an intuition that was calling out to him. It was as if something was attracting him. He did not know if this intuition was good or bad. Gong Fan breathed repeatedly. He did not know if he should walk up. He lightened his footsteps and quietly walked to the entrance of the corridor. However, he was a little hesitant. He did not know what was waiting for him. Of course, Gong Fan's rationality told him that this was not a horror movie. There would not be any ghosts or gods. At the thought of this, he felt a little relieved. Even if it was ghosts or gods, he was not afraid. What was there to be afraid of? Gong Fan mustered his courage and went upstairs. Putting aside the flashing lights and shadows, there was nothing particularly scary along the way. He did not know where to go, so he simply followed the corridor all the way up. At the same time, he could also figure out how tall the building was. He didn't know how long he had been climbing. The long corridor was one floor after another, but there was no indication of the floor. He couldn't remember how many floors he had climbed until he saw a tightly shut door at the end of the stairs. Gong Fan hesitated for a moment, but he still climbed up and tried to push the door. He did not expect the door to be unlocked and could be pushed open. After twitching for a long time, he carefully pushed the door open a crack. First he looked through the crack. Outside the door was a very large rooftop. From his angle, he seemed to be able to see a drying rack on the rooftop. On the rack were white coats and white bed sheets. There were many living rooftops like this in the hospital. Some doctors and nurses who lived in the dormitory would dry their washed work clothes and bed sheets here. However, other than that, he did not see anyone else. Gong Fan pushed the door open and walked out. The wind on the rooftop was very strong. In addition to the night wind was a little cold. He first walked around the edge of the rooftop. Standing on the rooftop, he could see the general layout of the hospital more clearly. There were a total of 3 rows of buildings arranged in a C shape, with a large garden in the middle. The building he was in was the southernmost building at the edge. Directly opposite was another building. He silently counted the number of floors on the opposite side because he did not know how many floors there were in this building. As he counted, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a strange shadow from the corner of his eyes. Only the middle rows of the building across the street were lit up. In the middle, which was probably the 4th floor, the lights were on. A shadow emerged from the far left and strode along the corridor. Gong Fan was shocked. He wasn't afraid, but he was very surprised that there was someone in the hospital. Moreover, judging from the shadow, it seemed to be a tall and strong man. Although he was far away and couldn't see his body clearly, under the light, the shadow was elongated. Based on the shadow, Gong Fan felt that his height should be more than 1.8 meters. Just as Gong Fan was secretly observing the man suddenly stopped in his tracks. Chapter 43-45. Under the moonlight, for some reason, a layer of fear shrouded Gong Fan's heart. Gong Fan subconsciously took half a step back and had an ominous premonition. At this moment, the man leaned against the window and looked in the direction of the rooftop where Gong Fan was. At this moment, Gong Fan was already on his guard and hid behind the drying rack. On the drying rack, the bed sheets were draped over the rack and stretched on the ground, just enough to cover his figure. Gong Fan didn't know what he was afraid of. It was just that subconsciously, he didn't want this man to find out. This was his subconscious reaction. However, when he turned his head and looked at the moonlight in the sky, his heart suddenly jumped. In his nervousness, he had forgotten that even if these white bed sheets could cover his figure, under the moonlight, they would cast his shadow. Gong Fan's breathing was almost suffocating. He could vaguely feel that if that man's gaze was really looking in his direction, then he might have already been discovered. With the intention of probing, Gong Fan turned slightly. Through the bed sheets that were fluttering in the night wind, he saw from the corner of his eye that the man was really looking in his direction. Two pairs of eyes, separated by not too far, met in mid-air. He could even feel the man's sharp gaze. This man was tall, and one look and one could tell that he was an extremely powerful man. Gong Fan recalled the time when Xianxia was stabbed and immediately equated this man with that dangerous personality. Oh no! Gong Fan instantly felt his scalp go numb. Since he had already been discovered, then there was no need for him to stick to hiding. He walked out from behind the bedsheets and saw that the man's eyes had regained focus and locked onto him. Following that, his shoulders were slightly arched, like a tiger waiting for an opportunity to hunt. The scene was at daggers drawn. If it wasn't for the distance between them, Gong Fan would even think that this man would pounce on him like a cheetah in the next second. His back was already covered in cold sweat. Gong Fan moved his feet slightly and slowly moved towards the door. The man looked at where he was. Then, as he watched him, he quickly ran in his direction through the corridor. He knew where he was and was about to start his hunt. Run. At this moment, there was only one word in Gong Fan's mind. His intuition told him that this man was very dangerous, so he pounced toward the door almost at the same time. Walking down from the rooftop, it was the 10th floor. The man was on the 4th floor. There was some distance between them, but the figure of the man flying in his direction still made him feel a lingering fear. If she didn't run away now, the man would definitely catch up. After all, he was a grown man, so he couldn't be slow. Run. But where could he run to? Gong Fan didn't have time to consider the man's identity. He only wanted to find a place to hide. As he ran in the huge hospital, the echoes of his footsteps made him feel as if someone was hot on his heels. This made him even more worried. Gong Fan groped through the doors one by one. Every door was either locked or a dead end. There was no place to hide at all. He didn't dare to place his hopes on the thin latch. He always felt that no matter how sturdy the lock looked, the door wouldn't be able to withstand a man's kick. Chapter 43-46. Gong Fan didn't know what to do and couldn't find a place to hide. He first ran down to the 9th floor and then turned back to the 10th floor. Just as he reached the 10th floor, he vaguely heard footsteps running upstairs. Gong Fan approached the window warily. He first stuck his head out and looked up. At this moment, the footsteps upstairs had quietened down. He first glanced to the left, then to the right. Then, on the upper right, he saw a person's head sticking out of the window as well. That man had actually run to the floor he was originally on at such a fast speed. The man was obviously not stupid. Through the sound of footsteps, he caught the message that he was on the 10th floor. He looked down and their gazes met again. Gong Fan instantly felt his hair stand on end. The man quickly retracted his head and footsteps sounded. Gong Fan suddenly realized that the man must be running in his direction. He was going crazy. Left or right? Gong Fan judged that the man would definitely come down from the stairs closest to him on the right. Hence, he ran towards the stairs on the left. Following the stairs, he went all the way down to the 4th floor. When he could no longer hear the flustered heartbeat, he calmed down slightly. He was like a headless fly the whole way, fleeing randomly in the hospital building. Gong Fan had never been in such a sorry state. But he knew in his heart. Alice had also told him that this was not an ordinary dream. He had already entered the world of his personality. If he was hurt here, in the real world, his personality would disappear without a trace. He was different from Yu Yu. Yu Yu would not die, but he would. Gong Fan had always remembered Alice's words and was determined to protect himself. He couldn't die. Even if he died, he had to perish together with those dangerous personalities. Gong Fan walked cautiously along the ward. At this moment, the doors were like cages that locked up scourges and ferocious beasts. No one knew what kind of dangerous thing would rush out of the door in the next second. He was cautious, and and his footsteps were extremely light. He didn't know if that man had learned from him and slowed down his footsteps, waiting for an opportunity to sneak up on him. Now, he felt like he was the prey in the open, while that man was lurking in the dark, ready to make a move. Unknowingly, the cold sweat on Gongfan's back had already been dried by the night wind. Following that, another layer of sweat seeped out. His clothes stuck tightly to his back. This sticky feeling was so real that he couldn't even tell if this was a dream or reality. Just as he was walking slowly, he saw that not far from him, the door suddenly creaked open slowly. He was like a frightened cat, jumping back a step, his face full of vigilance. He was so brave, and in the face of all this, he was already calm enough. However, right now, he didn't dare to summon up the courage to ask, "Who is it?" He tried his best to shrink his body into a ball so that he could retreat at any time if there was any danger coming out of the door. Just then, a pair of small hands grabbed the doorframe, and a small head slowly popped out. Under the moonlight, that delicate and pretty little face became clearer and clearer. When Gongfan saw the familiar face, his heartbeat quickened. Chapter 43-47. When he saw him, he was first shocked and his body subconsciously retreated. Then the child who looked exactly like him called out tentatively, Is it you? Gongfan?" Hearing this familiar voice, Gongfan felt a chill all over his body. However, it was not out of fear, but out of excitement. He immediately replied, "It's me." This child finally heaved a sigh of relief and beamed. His watery eyes gave him endless warmth. "It's me, Yu. Then, he hooked his finger at him and gestured, "Come over quickly." Gongfan could not hide his excitement, but he still tried his best to suppress the sound of his excited footsteps. He leaned against the wall and walked over. When he was 10 feet away from the door, Yu immediately leaned out, grabbed his arm, and pulled him into the room. The door closed softly. Yu carefully locked the door from the inside, trying not to make any sound. Just as he locked the door and turned around, Gongfan could not hold back his excitement and hugged him tightly. "Yu, I've finally found you." It was not that Gongfan was not touched, because he knew very well who Yu had entered this personality world for. In fact, he did not have to take such a risk. To him, although his life was not in danger in such a dangerous world, the mental stress was not a small blow. However, Yu had entered this world without hesitation for him and to protect him. Gongfan hugged him so tightly as if he wanted to integrate him into his bones and blood. Yu did not break free. Instead, he sighed and hugged him tightly as well. "It's good that you're fine." These few words warmed Gongfan's heart. The depression that he had felt for a long time was instantly swept away. However, this personality of his seemed to be born with undeveloped tear ducts. At this moment, logically speaking, the two of them should hug each other and cry bitterly. But he did not. He was so emotional that he could not cry. "You're fine too. That's great." Yu let go of him and sized him up deeply. Gongfan was also sizing him up at the same time. The two children looked exactly the same, even more so than Yu and Xiaoyichen. They were practically the same. Yu looked at Gongfan as if she was looking into a mirror. Gongfan looked at Yu and was filled with emotions. In a certain parallel world, the two personalities met in such a miraculous manner. This world was really too incredible. Here, Yu saw another version of himself. This feeling was very strange. He then asked curiously, "Why are you here?" Gongfan hesitated for a moment and explained, "I heard from Alice and Romanka that you were hypnotized for me and that you were supposed to be with me. However, I woke up halfway and took over your body. You couldn't return to your original world. I finally fell asleep and successfully entered the dream world. I found this hospital. I didn't expect you to be here too." This was probably the so-called telepathy. Gongfan could finally understand why something seemed to be calling him when he first entered the hospital. He could not hear anything, but in his consciousness, it was as if someone was reminding him to enter this hospital. Chapter 43-48. Before Yu could speak, Gongfan reminded him cautiously, "Just now, a man chased after me. I don't know who he is, but my instincts tell me that he will do something to me." When Yu heard this, his expression changed instantly. "A man? Is he very tall? Is he a little?" Gongfan followed his words and said, "Murderous aura?" "Yes. Yes, it's him." This time Yu was certain. He's in this hospital. Previously, I was chased by him too. I feel that he might be the dangerous personality who attacked Mommy. Oh. Gong Fan actually had the same suspicions, but when he heard Yu's doubts, he couldn't help but want to hear his analysis. What do you think? He's tall and strong. I'm guessing that he's a dangerous personality. Compared to you, he's more capable of attacking Mommy. Gong Fan pondered and nodded. He turned around silently, only to see a girl sitting on the bed. He was so shocked that he took half a step back and asked warily, Who is she? She should be another personality. Yu said, her name is Xianxia. Xianxia? Gong Fan observed her carefully. Xianxia was leaning against the headboard. Ever since Yu came to this room, she had been in this position and had never changed. Just based on her appearance, Xianxia seemed to resemble Xianxia. However, Gong Fan knew in his heart that Xianxia was definitely not Xianxia. However, he also suspected that because she had been with Xianxia for a long time, she had subtly influenced Xianxia's prototype and split into such a similar personality. Xianxia had an aura that was very similar to Xianxia. So much so that Gong Fan even thought that Xianxia must be Xianxia's childhood. She has been here since I entered this room, but she doesn't seem to have a dangerous personality. Gong Fan frowned. Even though Yu had said so, he still lowered his voice and reminded him, even so, you still have to be careful. In this place, even if it's me, don't trust anyone easily, understand? He remembered that he had once dreamt of a child who looked exactly like him and Yu. He was a very dangerous person. He could no longer tell if it was a real person or just a dream. Yu looked at him in surprise, but she knew that Gong Fan said that to protect her. Don't worry. I know what to do. Gong Fan asked curiously, you've never gone out since you came here? Yu nodded and said, I haven't gone out since I came here because I don't know what's going on outside. However, when I was in this room, I heard footsteps coming and going from outside the door several times. I suspect that man hasn't left. I think he must be looking for me. Gong Fan nodded and said, I'm sure that he hasn't left. He must be looking for you. Then, what should we do now? Yu thought that since they had found Gong Fan, they had to find a way to explore this world. However, even though there were two of them, they were alone. In the face of an unknown world, he didn't dare to make a decision recklessly. If they went out of this door and encountered any danger, Gong Fan might be doomed eternally. Chapter 43-49. If we don't go out and take a look, there won't be any progress. Gong Fan took a deep breath and sighed helplessly. Now that things have come to this, there's nothing we can do. We can only take one step at a time and be more vigilant. Yu still had his concerns. Let's not talk about you first. Both of us together, are we a match for that man? Gong Fan was silent for a while. Then he said seriously, don't worry, I'll protect you at all costs. Yu stared at him blankly for a while and couldn't help but smile coldly. What kind of joke are you making? After all, you're the one who should be protected, right? Gong Fan was shocked. Yu said that he would protect him? Shouldn't Yu be the one who should be protected the most? I'll be fine, don't worry. Yu was worried that Xianxia would hear him. Even though he didn't dislike this girl, he still had his guard up. I'm the main personality. No matter what happens here, I won't be in any danger in the real world. But you're different. If you die here, then in the real world, you will disappear forever. As Yu spoke, he couldn't help but get agitated. He took a step forward and held his shoulders tightly. He said anxiously, I don't want you to disappear. Gong Fan was silent. Suddenly, a voice came from behind. Are you going out? The two little lads turned their heads and saw that Xianxia had silently appeared beside them like a ghost. Are you hiding from that man? You know him? Yu turned pale with fright. He couldn't help but feel surprised. When Xianxia mentioned that man, her expression changed. She was obviously afraid. That man is very scary. I'm also afraid of him, so I'm hiding here and don't dare to go anywhere. Yu saw that Xianxia seemed to have understood something and immediately asked, who is he? However, the truth disappointed him. Xianxia shook her head helplessly. I don't know him. I don't know where he came from, what he does, and what his identity is. It's just that he has an inexplicable murderous aura. I don't dare to go near him. He's patrolling here every day, just like the Reaper. He's so powerful. I don't know if he'll hurt me, so I've been afraid to go out. Yu Yu's mind suddenly. Who was this man? Could it be the Reaper that Roman had been talking about? However, logically speaking, shouldn't he or Gong Fan be the one to assume the role of the Reaper? There were too many unknowns in this world. However, if you want to leave this place, I know of a secret passage that can lead you out of this hospital. You don't have to go through the main entrance. You can take the narrow path in the back garden. That's the back door of the hospital. It's never locked. His interest was piqued when he heard this. Do you know where it is? When Xianxia heard this, her originally bright eyes actually dimmed all of a sudden. Why? Of's that BB? Leave. Yu Yu questioned. Haven't you always been here? Chapter 4350. Xianxia leaned against the wall and sat down. She hugged her knees and looked disappointed. I'm alone. I feel lonely and uneasy. Yu Yu's heart softened when he saw how helpless she was. Gong Fan tugged at his wrist. Yu Yu knew that he was reminding him not to trust anyone easily. Yu Yu held his hand instead. Let's bring her along. Oh! Gong Fan was a little shocked by his risk. Yu Yu looked at Xianxia and turned around. I feel that she might be of some help to us. Moreover, it's fine if it's that man just now. But she's such a weak girl. Are you still afraid? Girl? Weak and boneless? Gong Fan couldn't help but laugh. Yu Yu, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge whether a person is a threat to you based on their appearance. Similarly, we need to take risks in life. If we didn't have any sense of adventure, you and I wouldn't have come here. Yu Yu's words were painstakingly unraveling and slowly prying open his heart. All right. He sighed and only said these two words. Then, he turned around and didn't say anything else. Yu Yu said to Xianxia, Can you really bring us out of here? Xianxia stood up excitedly. Her face was full of hope. Are you really willing to bring me out of here? We can't leave you here alone, right? Xianxia walked to the door like a nimble butterfly. Come with me. Yu Yu and Gong Fan looked at each other. Although they were skeptical, they decided to take the risk. Xianxia opened the door. They didn't know how she did it, but she opened the door silently. She stuck her head out and looked around. Seeing that there was no one, she came back to her senses and waved at Yu Yu and Gong Fan. The three of them sneaked out of the room quietly. Shoo! After taking a few steps, Xianxia suddenly shushed them, indicating for them to keep quiet. Yu Yu immediately became alert. What's wrong? I heard footsteps. Xianxia's hearing was extremely sensitive. Before Yu Yu and Gong Fan could hear anything, she carefully arched her body. Yu Yu did not dare to make a sound. Together with Gong Fan, they held their breaths and looked around vigilantly. Upstairs. Xianxia suddenly pointed upstairs and gave Yu Yu a look. I think he's upstairs. Why didn't I hear any footsteps? It's probably on a very high floor. You can't hear it, but I can. He's walking from the left to the right. Xianxia's voice was not soft. She had asked Yu Yu and Gong Fan to keep quiet so that she could detect the man's movements through their voices. Yu Yu felt his hair stand on end. It's fine. Let's go this way. Xianxia pointed in the direction of a door. Where is that? Yu Yu was still worried about her. However, Xianxia was extremely sensitive. She could tell that he did not trust her. Are you suspecting me? Yu Yu saw that his thoughts had been seen through. He did not insist on explaining himself. Instead, he pursed his lips awkwardly. Chapter 4351. After Xianxia finished speaking, she ignored Gong Fan's worried expression and walked towards the laundry room. Yu Yu grabbed Gong Fan's hand and immediately followed her cautiously. He sighed in his heart and was also skeptical. He did not hear any movement, but Xianxia could actually hear footsteps a few floors away. This was too mysterious. Xianxia obviously saw through his doubts and said with a smile, My hearing is very good. Perhaps, it's because I've been in such a quiet environment that I've developed such good hearing. Not to mention the sounds in the corridor, even outside the hospital, As long as you step on the lawn and the sound of the wind blowing, I can hear it clearly. Gong Fan heard this but did not think much of it. So, you know how I got into the hospital? You've been to the rooftop, right? Xianxia said with a smile. Gong Fan was even more shocked. She actually heard it. One had to know that the rooftop and the room she was in were so many floors apart. Yu also said, previously, Xianxia also heard your footsteps. She could tell that the man's footsteps were different from yours. Otherwise, I wouldn't have opened the door because I knew that it must be you outside. The three of them entered the laundry room. There were rows of automatic washing machines in the laundry room, as well as many white bed sheets that were drying. Gong Fan looked at the clothes that were drying and asked curiously, "Is there anyone else here?" "Yes, doctors and nurses." Xianxia shook her head. "I haven't seen any doctors or nurses. I've always been here. This seems to be an abandoned hospital. There aren't many people here anymore. You're usually alone in the hospital. Who takes care of you?" "Me. I take care of myself. My sister comes to visit me occasionally." "Sister?" "Sure." At the mention of her sister, a look of fear finally appeared on Xianxia's face. "My sister is very scary. She's always arrogant and has never been nice to me." When Gong Fan heard this, he immediately felt strange. For some reason he actually thought of Yun Na. Could it be that Xianxia's sister was subtly influenced by Yun Na's personality? Xianxia led them to a door and pushed it open. The door was never locked. When the door was opened, there was a Z-shaped staircase that led to the back garden downstairs. "It's here," Xianxia said. "Follow this staircase and you'll reach the back garden. After passing through the back garden, you'll reach the back entrance of the hospital." "What about the door after you walk out?" Gong Fan was a little lost. He couldn't tell if his car was parked at the main entrance or the back entrance. His gaze passed through the back garden. The back door seemed to lead to a mountain. "Is that a mountain?" "Yes." "What's on the mountain?" Xianxia shook her head blankly. "I don't know. I've never left this place. I haven't even been to the back garden. But I've always been upstairs, looking at the back garden from the window. I saw a path leading to the back door. Let's go. Let's go to the back of the mountain and take a look." Yu muttered in her heart. There couldn't be any wild beasts on this mountain, right? The three of them went all the way down the stairs until they reached the first floor. They plunged into the back garden. The back garden was a large and dense garden with greenery, flowers, grass, stone carvings. Chapter 43-52. The three of them were extremely cautious. Yu had an ominous feeling. He felt as if someone was watching him closely from behind, but he didn't dare to turn around. He felt that if he turned around and met that person's gaze, "I feel as if someone is watching us from behind." "You feel it too?" Gong Fan was about to turn around when Yu tugged at his arm. "Don't turn around." "Why?" "I feel that something is wrong. If we don't turn around, that person seems to be looking for us and watching us closely from behind. But if we turn around and try to run away, he will chase after us relentlessly." Gong Fan was stunned. Indeed, he felt that way too. "If we pretend that we don't see him, he won't chase after us?" Yu nodded. "Theoretically, yes." "Shoo, stop talking." Xianxia was a little scared. "I feel scared." "Don't be scared, we're still here." They walked through the back garden and saw an iron door at the end of the winding path. Yu finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the iron door. "We can leave the hospital from here, right?" "Yes." He took a step forward and opened the door before Xianxia did. Yu stepped out of the door, but for some reason, his vision blurred for a moment, and what he saw was yet another empty ward. It was as if the door was a terrifying enchantment. He thought that he could leave the hospital after walking out of the door, but after going around in circles, he was back in the hospital again. "Ah!" Yu opened his eyes abruptly and struggled to wake up from the bed. The nightmarish dream was tearing his brain apart. As far as his eyes could see, all he could see were concerned faces. Alice, Gongjia, Lisa, Huajin, Natalia. They were all here. However, Yu was so scared that he shrunk his shoulders. He didn't know why, but the two worlds kept switching back and forth. He couldn't even tell if he was still in the dream or had already walked out of it. "What's going on?" Yu held his head and rubbed his temples in pain. He was a little confused. Where am I? Who am I? His personality kept colliding with the door in his body, and he was a little lost. No one in the room said a word. It was so quiet that it was as if they were frozen. It was a strange scene. They were very worried, but Romanka had repeatedly reminded them that Yu was awake. No matter how worried they couldn't say a word. Otherwise, it would disturb Yu's consciousness. Romanka was standing beside Yu. He was so quiet that it was as if he didn't exist. Yu didn't notice his presence. Hence, he took the opportunity to bring a bottle of smoke to the tip of Yu's nose. The smoke rose in spirals. Yu unknowingly took a big breath. The cool and refreshing smoke traveled along his nose. It was as if the cool and refreshing chill had gushed into his swollen temples and calmed his chaotic heartbeat. He closed his eyes and greedily sucked in another big mouthful. Only then did the restless feeling of waking up from the nightmare slowly disappear. Romanka finally spoke.